The item on the agenda is a presentation and discussion of the fiscal year 2023-2024 proposed budget. At the last meeting or work session, there was a question raised by, I believe it's Councilmember Fuentes, wanting for some direction or some discussion related to housing and permanent supportive housing. So without objection, we will start with that. And then what I think I'll do to try to manage this, and as we've talked about for the public that may be watching, what we've talked about is today, this work session is a question and answer opportunity for council members to ask questions of staff and get answers to questions. And the way I'll try to manage that is when we have a broad general topic like housing and Austin Public Health and permanent supportive housing, I'll ask council members to ask questions about that, and then we'll move to another broad general topic that we know we've had a lot of council questions with. For example, probably public safety will be the one after that, and I'll try to work us through in a efficient way so that we can get all of your questions answered, but do it where we're not running all over the place and running staff up here from all over the place. So with that, unless there's questions of me, Manager, I'll recognize you.
Thank you, Mayor. I think we're going to call on Carrie. She's going to kick us off, and I think she's going to be providing you the presentation today, as I understand it. And so, Carrie, I'll turn it over to you, and we're ready to answer your questions after the presentation.
Council members, while she is stepping up to the microphone, I know you all join me. I've now swung by a couple of town hall meetings that the council members have had, and Carrie is at all of those. And Carrie is, she does a great job at interfacing with the public and providing answers to questions. And so even though we've still got a ways to go in this budget process, I think it's only appropriate we thank you for what you're doing for us. And with that, I've set you up. Let's see how this goes.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Carrie Lang, Budget Officer with the Financial Services Department. And I say this all the time. Yes, I am the one up here talking, up here having the conversation, but it is the work of the entire staff that gets us to this point. And so this presentation wouldn't be possible without my good friends behind me, as well as the staff at the Budget Office and in the department. So thank you. And with that, I'll go ahead and get started with our conversation today. This morning, we're going to start talking about permanent supportive housing, or continuing that conversation. And so what we want to do is make sure we do an overview of the components of our homelessness response. We'll talk about permanent supportive housing, an overview of that as a whole, the housing or development pipeline that we're seeing, as well as planned spending, and finally, ARPA investment for PSH. So we want to start with a conversation or a discussion about the larger homeless response efforts. As you know, in the budget document, and as we've talked about homelessness response, we talk about the core areas that we're focusing on, whether it's crisis response, public space management, reducing inflow, and the biggest portion, almost over half of it, 51%, is housing stabilization. Permanent supportive housing is 34% of our total spending plan when we look at fiscal year 24 and the proposed spending that we have. That's at $27.6 million when we think about that. And so when we say housing stabilization, permanent supportive housing includes site-based rental, as well as housing vouchers and tenant-based rentals. This slide here just really talks through the spending as we've been talking about it over the last couple of weeks, based on capital spending, CIP dollars, our operating dollars that you'll see. And then with PSH in particular, there aren't any grant dollars that we're including in this spending plan, because we're going to talk about our ARPA funds, the state and local fiscal relief, or SLFRF, and home ARPA. We'll talk about those a little bit later so you can understand the spending plan for those. When you look at this capital spending, it is the fluctuation of what projects that we anticipate over the next year this fiscal year estimate and fiscal year 24 planned. And so as those projects keep coming online, we'll see those ebbs and flow in the capital program. This change that you see here on the operating side is because of the nature of the contracts. These are multi-year contracts, and so if there are some savings that we anticipate for fiscal year 23, we'll just move those spending plans over to fiscal year 24. So that's why you see that big bump in the planned spend for fiscal year 24, because of the savings that we've recognized in this fiscal year. So then we look at what PSH, or permanent supportive housing, is overall. And we wanted to start the conversation by talking about the eligible population. PSH isn't for everyone. There is prioritized placement. It's for those who have chronic homelessness, those who need or have disabling conditions and who need prioritized placement. So when you think about where we are and who we target, those are the target neighbors that we look for when we're looking at placing them in PSH, as well as thinking about what our current gap is. Right now, about 3,000 households are in need of PSH. And then thinking about the service model, how do we, what have we created as a service model for this program? Affordable housing, that means that, you know, the individual usually doesn't pay any more than 30% of their total income. And so it is really income-based. They can pay up to about $300 or $350 a month. It includes case management and other services such as mental health care and substance abuse. And then we try to reduce the screening barriers that people come across in this particular housing program, so that we make sure that they have as little, limited number of barriers as possible in getting them placed. And then when you think about what the model looks like, permanent supportive housing is, we're focusing on site-based. Historically, we've done tenant-based as well as site-based. We're focusing on site-based dedicated development. There are tenant-based, which are vouchers that are part of the program, but in 2010, we began looking at site-based as an option. And then in 2019, we opened up our first site-based PSH project, and as you can see, there's 50 units at Terrace at Oak Springs. Over 90% of our current capacity is tenant-based programs, but we are trying to transition to more site-based program. And then, as you see in the last bullet, Finding Home ATX has set a goal of 1,000 units of site-based PSH as part of their goals for that program. And so in order to do permanent supportive housing successfully, we have three areas that must be completed, or three elements. The first is capital development, and permanent supportive housing cannot exist with all three of these elements in place. And the first is capital development, and that is, you know, the funding to actually build the units themselves or to purchase the units themselves. It can be a variety of sources for the capital development. We have tax credit equity, other federal or state programs, the government entities, or other government entities such as Travis County. It's usually a collaborative effort of many of these funding options, and the City of Austin, our housing department, is usually a part of most of the site-based permanent supportive housing programs that are in development right now. The second element is the wraparound services, supportive services. This includes on-site case management, which keeps the individuals connected to other services that they may need, such as basic health needs, basic needs of basic health care. And then it also includes a variety of funding sources. So as you all know, our public health department has the contracted support services. There are other municipalities or government entities across the region that supports wraparound services. And then our nonprofit partners also do this as well. This is often considered the backbone of PSH because these services allow for these individuals to stay in housing, get the support that they need so they do not return to homelessness. And then the final element is the rental subsidy or the operating subsidy that is provided through what many know as voucher programs. These voucher programs pay the difference between what the tenant pays and what the market is for those units. And so the voucher program consists of, again, several different funding. It could be the federal government, it could be local funding to provide for these vouchers, and they're used to make sure that the facilities stay operating. So, the maintenance that's needed, the grounds upkeep, all the things that's needed to keep the facilities in space so that we can use it for years to come. So when we think about all these elements and the things that what we've been talking about have been in the pipeline, you'll see that this slide here shows our anticipated pipeline, which includes the 3 elements that I just discussed. And so, as you can see right now, we have 126 units that are site-based units in operation today. We have 1,444 tenant-based units. We anticipate ongoing units coming on, site-based units coming on through 2026. And so what you see here is our anticipated growth. When you look at anticipated for 2023, we have 279 units that we anticipate coming on by the end of this fiscal year. That includes Espero at Rutland, Balcones Terrace, and Pecan Gardens. Those are all funded with 2018 bond dollars, and that will get us to what we know is a successful, or what we see as a successful pipeline when we look at the goals from Finding Home ATX and continuing this work to reduce homelessness in the community. And then finally, I wanted to just talk through the ARPA spending. There were some questions about the ARPA spending plan and how some of the dollars have been reallocated. This 95.3 is the total ARPA spend for homelessness response. However, 14.1 million was the amount allocated for capital purchases. We reallocated 3 million of that for emergency shelter capital, which left 11.1 million available for ongoing capital development work. In June, we encumbered or spent 10.5 million, and we have a $600,000 balance for housing capital in permanent supportive housing. And then home ARPA, that 11.4 million, we have been approved by the government, by the federal government on our spending plan. We are going to go back and make some recommended changes to that spending plan, but 1 million is currently in the rental housing development assistance program, and the team will go back to adjust that spending plan with plans to fully, or to begin expending the remaining dollars in fiscal year 24. And that is our PSH presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Fuentes.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lang, for the presentation. So is it accurate to say that we, in this proposed budget for fiscal year 24, that we have a reduction in our capital dollars for permanent supportive housing based on previous year? And I'm looking at slide 4.
That is not a reduction in the budget. That is just the anticipated spending plan based on the projects that are currently in place that the team is working on in development. That can fluctuate if the projects move along any faster. If we have savings of that 15 million that you see in this fiscal year, that spending plan can be updated for fiscal year 24.
Okay. And because a lot of feedback we're hearing, the concerns we're hearing from our community is that we are not continuing, and in fact, we're not accelerating our investments in permanent supportive housing. And so with this, can you share a little bit more about the distinction between planned spend versus what we are projecting? Because you said we could allocate more, but based on last fiscal year, we spent 15 million on capital. For this upcoming fiscal year, we're projecting to spend 10 million. So that is, we're projecting to spend less on permanent supportive housing.
And I'm going to turn and look at Rosie to have her provide her insight.
I was just saying that I could answer that.
So the estimate that you see there for fiscal year 24 is from April of this year. And that is what we were anticipating we might spend through our rental housing development assistance program. Recalling that those projects are applications that come to us. And so we're responding to fund the needs that come to us. If additional dollars or additional requests come in for PSH and they score appropriately and it's the right time for us to invest in those projects, we will invest in those projects. You can also note on the home ARP dollars, while we currently have an approved spend plan with the federal government that has $1 million dedicated to capital through the Rental Housing Development Assistance Program, we are looking to do a substantial amendment with the federal government to shift all of those dollars into our rental housing development assistance. So that will be an additional $10 million that will go into RHODA for us to spend on PSH this coming fiscal year. We just have to go through the change and process with the federal government.
And when do you anticipate us finding out about that?
We have the dollars allocated. We have an approved spend plan. It's just changing it kind of from one line item to a different line item. And so those amendments have to go through HUD. They are easier to do. I don't have a time frame on that, but I also don't foresee a problem with getting those funds awarded in fiscal year 24. Again, recognizing that when we make an award, when you guys as the governing body for Austin Housing Finance Corporation make an award, that's setting the money aside, we're processing the paperwork. The draws on that will happen over time as the property actually goes into construction.
So is this the plan, the PSH projected spending chart that we have, it does not include the ARPA dollars?
That's correct.
Okay. Because at this point, we only have about $600,000 left in ARPA dollars.
Well, when I say ARPA, there's ARPA, SLF, RF. I always get that acronym wrong. That's the funding that came through the Homeless Strategy Office. Mm-hmm. The home ARP are dollars that were awarded to the City of Austin through the general HUD entitlement grant formula during the pandemic. And we went through the process to plan for those dollars for expenditure. And so that's a different bucket of funds.
And what about the site-based units? It also appears that we have a reduction in site-based units. Is that accurate?
You're looking at, so I can be clear, you're looking at slide 7.
Slide 7,
those
yes.
are the units that are coming online each year. So we currently have 126 site-based permanent supportive housing units in operation today. Mm-hmm. We anticipate 279 additional units coming online in calendar year 2023, including Balcones Terrace, Espero at Rutland, and Pecan Gardens. In 2024, we'll have an additional 235. In 2025 and beyond, an additional 425. So it keeps growing, mm-hmm. and that's just what we know about today. I anticipate moving as we continue to spend, as we continue to see projects come online and requests come in, that number will continue to grow as we get into 2026 and beyond. These are the projects that we know about today that the city has invested our rental housing development assistance dollars in.
Okay, so just to clarify, the amount that we're projecting to spend in permanent supportive housing and capital costs, right now it has $10 million included in the base budget. You have shared publicly that we anticipate getting a $10 million federal home grant. Is that right? So that would put us at $20 million. So we would have an increase in permanent supportive housing capital funding.
That is correct. And again, that's just what we estimate because we can't forecast what projects are going to come to us and what will contain permanent supportive housing. So we're basing that $10 million estimate on what we've seen over the last couple of years and what we've seen the trend to be. So if we get requests for additional and it scores appropriately through our criteria and the evaluation and the underwriting and everything that we do associated with that program, we'll spend more than that $10 million. That's just what... If we were trying to make an estimate for what we think is going to come through, it's $10 million. We don't separate, when we fund our rental housing development assistance projects, we don't separate out whether we're funding a 50% unit or a 30% unit or a permanent supportive housing unit. We track that, but the funding isn't delineated by MFI level.
Okay. And then what about the tenant-based support. I have this chart on page 7 shows 0 anticipated for the
Right.
next
So just to reiterate, this chart shows new sort of units or beds coming into service each year, not the cumulative portfolio. The total column shows you where we would anticipate being at the end of 2025 or so. It is plausible that there will be increased tenant-based programming, but in fact, what we are trying to do is really lean into the site-based PSH, because in our market, our providers are having so much difficulty finding available units in the rental market to place those tenant-based resources. So while there could be some, I expect it to be modest. Not only the city, but the continuum of care, the HUD funding is being prioritized for site-based PSH rather than tenant-based.
Okay. And Ms. Gray, with this, I mean, to me, the way I see it is we are investing and injecting considerable amount of resources, not only here at the city, but the county has also dedicated a considerable amount, also over $100 million. The state has come in to also provide additional support. To me, to see the amount of site-based units that come online, it doesn't look like it's at the scale that we need to respond to the crisis that we have. Are these conservative estimates of how many site-based units we can bring online? Like, what's some context here that we should be considering?
I would not describe it as conservative. And so, I mean, I think if we consider that right now, today, we have 126 site-based PSH units, and we're projecting that by the end of 2025 or shortly thereafter, we'll be looking at over 1,000. That is a dramatic increase in site-based PSH, sparked in part by the Finding Home ATX effort, which really said we need to lean into this. We acknowledge there's a very substantial gap. And so while there will be a continued need, probably another 2,000 households or so needing services at the end of that period, this is the result of a very intentional effort on the part of not only the city, but its partners, Travis County, the Housing Authority, the HUD, the Continuum of Care, to increase the number of site-based PSH in a relatively short period of time.
That's a good distinction. These numbers are just city-led, site-based units, right?
No, ma'am.
Oh, they're inclusive.
So almost all permanent supportive housing projects have multiple funding sources. It's extreme. I can't think of a single PSH project that happens with a single funder. Usually there's a partnership. Perhaps we provide some capital and the Housing Authority provides vouchers, or typically there will be 4 to 5 capital sources in a single project. So this is a global pipeline. The reality is the city is in most of these projects in one way or another.
Okay. All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Kelly.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you could provide insight into whether the current budget allocation for permanent supportive housing is expected to remain consistent in future budgets for the City of Austin. Considering the dynamic nature of different priorities and changing circumstances, I want to know if we should anticipate any adjustments in the future, and if you could elaborate on the types of decisions council may face in future budgets, so that we can start thinking about that even now as we make decisions.
I think as we look at the anticipated spending, it will be varied based on, as Rosie stated, the amount of or the types of applications they receive. And so when the team looks at the proposed spending for the next fiscal year or the coming fiscal years, they're looking at all of those dynamics. I don't anticipate any changes from an operational perspective, but I think it's an ongoing conversation that we can have, and Rosie and her team and Diana and her team can provide updates to let us know if there are changes that we will need to make in the coming fiscal years.
Okay, thank you. And then this may be more for Diana or Ms. Gray, excuse me. Could you elaborate on the specific criteria and metrics used to evaluate the effectiveness of permanent supportive housing programming? I want to know how the budget allocation specifically will be tied to those outcomes, and how frequently progress reports will be made to council related to that spending and those outcomes.
Sure. So I'll speak a little bit to the primary outcomes, and then Adrian Stirrup, Director of APH, may want to speak to the reporting cadence on the service side. The primary measure around permanent supportive housing is housing stability. These are individuals that, I think we demonstrably, but for the rental support and the robust services, would not remain housed. And so we primarily, but certainly not only, look at key milestones. Are individuals still in their housing and doing well? And so just as an example, on average, our housing stability at a year or so is upwards of 90%. And that's where we have historically done a little bit better than the national average. That's what we continue to want to see. And that's a challenge given the complexities of the conditions and situations that people find themselves in. We also look at increases in income, whether that's earned income or income from benefits, changes to employment. As Ms. Lang mentioned, permanent supportive housing is targeted to people living with disabilities. That doesn't mean they don't work. It may not be full-time work, but we do see increases in employment. And then at the more granular level, we don't necessarily do this with every program, but across the system, we have done cost-benefit studies previously with our partners that show that public spending for inpatient stays, for incarceration, for emergency room utilization, for utilization of EMS services, et cetera, all decrease significantly.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that mitigation of the problem related to individuals experiencing homelessness is a much more cost-effective way to spend those dollars. I think that's great. The people that I talk to in the community would like to see more transparency related to those outcomes. And if there's any way that we could create some sort of dashboard, maybe on a very high level, or something where we could point our constituents to say, look, your investments are preventing homelessness. These are the outcomes. I think that would be very helpful. So I don't know if my colleagues would be interested in something like that. But when we're spending these dollars, I want to make sure that the community knows the benefit that they're getting out of them, and not just through these types of discussions, but somewhere where they can look directly. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ryan Alter, I'm sorry, do you have something you want to add? Please.
Yeah, just briefly. So the staff collect performance measures on an annual and quarterly, and then reports are posted annually to the open data portal. But I think because of the long-term nature of permanent supportive housing, as Ms. Gray mentioned, Director Trulove, we can work with council on an annual performing or reporting period if you would like. But just so you know that as a standard, it's quarterly, and then results are posted annually to our open data portal.
That's very helpful to know. Thank you so much for following up on that. Thank you, Mayor, for the time.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'll go to Councilmember Ryan Alter, then Councilmember Harper Madison.
I retract that answered my question.
Okay, very
Thank
good.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to not be with y'all today, but appreciate you being here. I just wanted to confirm that these are global, so these include the collaborative projects, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And do they include the conversion of Northbridge?
No, sir. As you know, we have, for the time being, elected to continue operating Northbridge as a bridge shelter. And so we have eliminated Northbridge from the pipeline at this time.
And looking at kind of our global goals that were set out a couple years ago, it was 1,000 PSH units, and then 300 units for the continuum of care. Are those separate 300? Those are not PSH. Those are just, I assume, like 30% units.
That's correct. I'll attempt a description and let Director Truelove correct me. So what we call continuum of care, or COC units, are essentially units that are flexible. They're available to the system for referring clients. You'll remember that I spoke earlier about people with tenant-based resources. So they have a portable voucher and a case manager assigned to them, but have had a very difficult time finding units. So in addition to our site-based PSH with dedicated rental subsidy and services, we've also incentivized the creation of units that are just set aside available for those individuals. I believe at our last count, we were also on track to meet that goal of 300 plus COC units.
And do we have any kind of study or estimate of what percent of the unhoused population needs PSH, needs that level of services, or versus, whether it's just a 30% unit or even all the way on the other end, diversion? What do we think the percent of the population actually needs this level of housing?
So let me give you, if it's okay, a gross number rather than a percentage. In a 2020 analysis that looked at what our sort of right-sized or system at equilibrium would include, the estimate at that time was for around 4,500 units of permanent supportive housing. That is the same analysis that we utilized when we did our recent study around our shelter portfolio. And we currently have 1,570. So based on that, approximately, we're probably at around 3,000 units short. And again, have about 1,000 in the pipeline right now.
Okay. And once someone goes into PSH, is it pretty much that they will be there for quite some time? Is there much churn through, or should we kind of count that bed as occupied for the long haul?
So there are no time limitations by program design in permanent supportive housing. People can stay there, renew their lease, so long as they want to, and they're able to comply by the terms of their lease. In practice, the average tenancy is around 5 years, and there are a variety of things that happen. So people will sometimes move on and determine, I may need a rental subsidy, but that person no longer needs the intensive case management that comes along with the unit, and so they go elsewhere. We have a lot of folks who do go on to more intensive settings, care settings. Obviously living unsheltered has significant impacts on people's health over time. And we also have an aging population, so it's not uncommon for people to move into a nursing home eventually. And of course, we have some people who pass away. And then there is some attrition where people leave or are unsuccessful in the setting. But again, our turnover is something like 15% total.
And my last question, the expansion over at Mobile O's and Fishes, is that incorporated here, or is that a separate? Those aren't PSH units.
So let me give an answer. So 50 units are currently counted as permanent supportive housing. And the reason for that is that via a HUD RFP that happened last year, there was an award to Mobile O's and Fishes in partnership with Family Elder Care that provided, not only the unit that Mobile Loaves and Fishes was providing there on site, but also the rental subsidy and services that we spoke about being critical to this model. There is a possibility of more units at Mobile Loaves and Fishes eventually being converted formally to PSH, but right now there is not dedicated services, dedicated rental subsidy, as well as a commitment to take referrals through the coordinated entry system. So we see that as a very important potential source of new PSH units, but it will be dependent on increased availability of services and rental subsidies, along with reaching an agreement with the coordinated entry system to accept those referrals.
All right. Well, I appreciate y'all very much, and that's all I got.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Allison Alter.
Thank you. I had some questions on slide 4. I just wanted to clarify. So you said something that there were savings from fiscal year 23 that were rolling over. Wasn't sure whether that was for the capital or operating, or if that was just a possibility if there were savings.
The savings that are anticipated in fiscal year 23 are in the operating.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And then, so the 6 million, there may still be savings because they didn't come online as early as we thought. Is that what happened?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
So the PSH, I'm assuming that the PSH units didn't come on as early as we thought, so that there's extra funding in there?
That's correct.
Okay, and so then that would roll into on top of the 17, or the 17 includes that projected savings?
The 17 includes that projection.
Okay, but it also increases because we have units online, so you have to have more in operating. So we have to build the units, and then we have ongoing operating costs. So you would expect over time, if we had a goal, that you would be increasing your operating and decreasing your capital over time, unless you had a much larger goal at the end for the PSH. Is that correct?
If I understand your question correctly, you're saying, would the operating increase as the units come on to provide those services? And for fiscal year 24, the spending is based on the anticipated units that are coming on. And then, of course, as we look at the out years, if there are needs for increased operating to support those, and that's what we would do in the future budget cycles.
Yeah, and I was just pointing out that if, by virtue of the way this works, once those units come online, your operating is going to increase faster than your capital because you have to address the services. Unless you were trying to build another 1,000 units, which we might try to do, but at this point, that's not, in this period, that's not the goal. Is that correct?
But I would also say that the capital dollars will typically be reflected first, because we'll be deploying funds for through our rental housing development assistance program before as the properties are in pre-development almost, and then we spend the dollars as they go into construction, and then the operating and the services dollars come into play once those units are in production. So there's a spike in capital, and then a couple years later almost, there's a spike in operating and services needs.
Thank you. I think that's what I was trying to get at in terms of the pattern that we would observe as we're trying to understand these numbers. Thank you. I think that was my main question. Thank you.
Councilmember Harper Madison.
Thank you, I appreciate it, and it's actually sort of out of turn because the previous Councilmember Alter asked some questions that got me thinking. So, as some budget amendments, we're bringing a $550,000 budget amendment to one of those aforementioned 7 projects, and I'm curious about why the particular facility I'm making reference to can't use bond dollars or other sources of funding, and how that would contribute to our permanent supportive housing goals. And I don't think that question is for you. I think it's for sorry, Ms. Lang, I should have prefaced it with that.
Thank you, Council Member. I believe the project that you're referring to is one of 7 projects. It's part of the Travis County Supportive Housing Collaborative. It is a little bit idiosyncratic in that it is not specifically permanent supportive housing. It is a facility that provides both longer-term shelter and substance use disorder treatment.
Right.
It is not based on a lease, so it's not residential housing per se. And so because of that, because of the configuration of the units, which don't conform to code or meet housing quality standards, which is a HUD term of art, it is not really in the housing category, and the money that the housing department is utilizing is explicitly for residential housing per se.
I would love to explore moving forward, especially with the Housing and Planning Committee, how we can reconfigure those regulations, because rules are never necessarily set in stone. So I wonder if we could bust that open and do something different. So
Are
I'd
these
like
bond
to.
covenants?
They are, but this is more, I would want to bring our law department into that conversation.
Oh,
'cause
naturally.
That's part of
Of course.
how we've gotten the authority to use general obligation bonds because of the fact that it is housing, which is, so there's a legal component to that, and I'm sure there's some prior legal opinions that we can share in advance to help you kind of understand how we got to the point where we're at.
Something tells me working through the city of Austin, nothing is going to go fast. So
Nothing is going to go fast.
I just
That
look
is-
forward
that is true.
to continuing the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Members, if that's all the questions we hit, Councilmember Fuentes.
Thank you. I do have some more questions. This is to take it back to the county projects. I was wondering, do we have an update on the status of those projects, or if you could provide anything new that we should know and be considering of?
I did have a meeting with the Travis County Collaborative, and I think they are still experiencing a gap in financing that they're trying to work through. I was expecting to receive some applications for the most recent quarter of rental housing development assistance, that the applications would have come in this past week. I would have to check to make sure that they did in fact come in. But they're still trying to cover a funding gap to ensure that, they're able to have their capital stacks come together. I want to say that's around $12.5 million. I don't know, based on the applications that are going to, I don't know. First of all, I don't know if we've received applications. I assume we have. I don't know how those are going to score as we look at our first quarter awards. All of that would be way too preliminary for us to give an opinion on. But we have approved recalling the 3 PFCs to move forward with the full property tax exemption.
Yes. And can you remind us how many units that intends to put online?
I don't have that in front of me. Maybe Mandy or Jamie are watching and they can text it. And if they do, then I will share that as soon as I get it.
And because those permanent supportive housing units are not included.
No,
in
they
these.
are included in these. I mean, I could go through my documents and pull out the number, and maybe Diana knows off the top of her head, but those, the Travis County Collaborative projects are absolutely part of the pipeline of numbers that you saw up on the screen earlier.
They are. Okay. And I guess what are your thoughts on how long it's taking us to build these site-based permanent supportive housing?
I feel like it's taking the amount of time, I guess, that I would expect it to. Most of these have funding that is associated with tax credits. They have very strict timelines on when they have to get their certificates of occupancy. That's why we fund them. We help them through the development process as they may need to ensure that they're able to construct within their timeframes. It just takes several years for these properties to come online when we're talking about new construction. 2 of the properties that are coming online in calendar year 2023 are in fact converted hotels, and that's why we're seeing them happen faster. One of which is Balcones Terrace, which is 50 units of permanent supportive housing, and the other being Pecan Gardens, which is 78 units of permanent supportive housing. And we anticipate those before the end of this calendar year. So it's having a balanced approach. And we, if you recall, when we started the site-specific approach, or the site-based approach for permanent supportive housing. The first project that we had was Terrace at Oak Springs in 2019, and that was 50 units, and that was unheard of at the time. And it kind of established a precedent that allowed us to pursue more and bigger projects, and that's why you see projects like Aspero at Rutland coming on, which has got 101 units of permanent supportive housing. So the projects that are in operation right now that make up that 126, the biggest chunk of that is the 50 units at Terrace at Oak Springs, and then it's a smattering of units in a number of other projects. And that smattering has grown over time, and you'll see more and more of those coming online as we spend, as we see the 2018 GEO-bond funded projects coming online, and then as we see how things will progress with the 2022 GEO bonds.
Councilmember, one of the things that we'll want to come back at a later date, we're in the process of engaging an audit, and that audit's going to explore how the housing, how the AHFC works, how the permanent supports, it works with the homeless division, so that we can kind of at least have a picture, a macro picture of what our objectives are, what our lane is, what's the lane for the city of Austin under our tools that we have, and then maybe perhaps identify the lanes for other jurisdictions to be able to take on. And then we need to get into the development process. We've had several meetings with individuals that are trying to develop affordable housing, and as you would know, our development process is not easily navigated, and so they need assistance in getting through that process. And we need to find ways to streamline that, because that is part of that pipeline can only go as fast as our regulatory process allows it to go. So we need to go through that. And so all those things are going to get explored in 2 different phases, and then we can bring the detailed work so that we know exactly what we're trying to get done year in and year out.
And when do you anticipate that audit?
Well, the audit, we should engage it pretty quick, and then list out the questions we want them to go at it, and then have them go to do the work. I don't have the timeline yet till we negotiate the contract.
Okay, because that's what I'm getting at, is how can we scale up
Sure.
production of the permanent supportive housing units?
Right.
And certainly wouldn't want our own, administration policies and regulations to be a barrier in that development. So.
And the only worry, and it's a worry that we're going to have to figure out later. Some of this is one-time federal money that's being used to help us do this. And when that federal money is no longer there, we're going to have to scramble to figure out how we're going to do the financing moving forward. And that's not something we won't be able to do. We just have to figure out what it will take.
Right. It's a tremendous opportunity for our city to have this injection of federal dollars to support us in our effort on creating a better homelessness response system.
Now that President Biden has asked the staff to come back to the offices, I'm sure they're going to move a lot faster.
Not going to touch that one, okay?
Yeah.
Director Trulip, I do just want to punctuate what you mentioned about the 2 hotels that the city purchased. That's Balcones and Pecan Gardens. Those 2 hotels that the city purchased a few years ago, you anticipate those coming online as permanent supportive housing units by the end of 2023?
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
and there's a 3rd hotel. It's bungalows at Century Park, and it is following in 2024. They're all undergoing minor rehabilitation to have them be suitable for this type of housing, but they will be quickly delivering needed homes.
Great. I'm happy to hear that, and I'm excited to hopefully be there when we celebrate the opening. The last question I have on this topic is around the North Bridge shelter. So in the proposed budget, do we have it operating for the full year, or is it only are we including operating funds for 6 months?
My understanding is North Bridge is 6 months of funding for fiscal year 24.
Okay. Colleagues, I do want to highlight that because I think that it has been a need that we have as a city to provide that bridge shelter, especially as part of the HEAL initiative when we're connecting individuals to emergency and temporary shelter opportunities. And with this, it comes with wraparound services. And so I want us to acknowledge that right now it's only funded to continue for 6 more months. And I do have some concerns around that.
I'd like to clarify. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So there are 6 months of dedicated general funds for Northbridge in the budget this year. APH has indicated we believe we can find alternate funding sources for this fiscal year with the intent of operating for the
Councilmember,
entire year.
we're not going to stop funding this at 6 months, so that we'll make sure that we operate for 12 months. And I'll ask the staff to make sure they figure a way to do that.
Okay, we have it on record right here. Thank you.
Councilmember Ryan Alter, then Councilmember Vela, then Councilmember Harper Madison.
Thank you. Councilmember Fuentes made me think about something. Rosie, do you have, or Director Trulip, apologies, whether it's formal analysis or feeling about the both cost per unit and time it takes to come online for purchasing a hotel versus our ground up PSH projects? What is one more cost effective than the other, and is one really faster than the other?
I have to think that purchasing a hotel would be faster, even if it requires some renovation because you're not building it from the ground up. Cost per unit, though, I'm not sure. I would want to do some analysis on that because it does, there are very few hotels that are positioned to be able to just turn the keys over and have it be able to operate as permanent supportive housing. And that's a little bit of a misnomer to think that we can make that change really quickly.
We'll get that.
We can get that,
You
but
can
I
think
don't
about
know
it.
that.
It just seems like looking at the timeline for some of these, it has taken quite some time, just almost as long as the
Yeah.
Sparrow and in some instances, but there are other factors involved there, so I know it's not, but I just wanted to
Probably
think
not
about how we
as
think about
long
that.
as the full construction. And the other thing to note is that we are continuing to, as we've gone through time since the pandemic, we've been continuing to kind of watch how hotel pricing might, what that looks like. And the estimates and the sales price that we've been seeing for appropriate hotels has not been as cost effective as it would have been, 5-6 years ago. So it's quickly not becoming as feasible as we would hope it to be.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Vela, then Councilmember Harper Madison.
I just want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the tenant assistance, the rental assistance that we've provided. I know that we have just signed a contract with El Buen Samaritano for, I believe, $7.8 million. And when is that contract supposed to be kicking in?
We anticipate that we'll start deploying funds as soon as it's executed, potentially even before the end of the month.
Okay.
Or that we expect it to be executed this month.
So imminently, essentially.
Yes.
And that contract is for the $7.8 million that council allocated in the last budget year.
Correct. It
Okay.
was one-time dollars, and because we were coming off of the pandemic, we were no longer able to utilize the structure of the rent program and the exemptions that was contracted under. And so we knew that we were going to have a delay in deploying those funds so that we could establish a program and go through a competitive process. And you saw the result of that with the contract with El Buen Samaritano in July.
Great. And so basically, I guess during the pandemic, we had the, ARPA money and other
Yes.
sources of federal funding, but I guess those were on an emergency basis. So that was kind of expedited to get it out the door and get it into people's hands.
And it was a very different program back during the pandemic. In that case, folks could literally apply for funds and get funded just directly. With the current program, we're looking to help those that are really at the brink of eviction. They have to be referred into our services, and it's not just calling and applying for funds.
Yeah, I completely understand. And so prior to the $7.8 million that are about to start going out the door, when did the federal funding kind of run out, or where are we in terms of our past efforts kind of dovetailing with our current efforts?
Yeah, the last federal dollars we got, I believe, were allocated in January of 2022. And that was through kind of a reshuffle of funds that hadn't been spent by other jurisdictions, and so they redeployed those to us. And that was about $1 million or so, and we've been deploying those dollars since through Austin Public Health and their neighborhood centers, because we did not have a contract in place, and we did not have funding for a longer-term program until we got into the fiscal year that we're in right now with the award that came in the budget that we're in right now.
Okay. And do we have any sense of what the drawdown is going to be on that $7.8 million contract? In other words, how long will that money last?
Based on our work with El Buen, we anticipate a spend of, or at least a need of, about $1 million a month. And so that $7.8 million contract really will probably only last us, if we spent it to the need that we're being asked, it would last us through April of 2024.
So in this fiscal year, then, we're drawing the $7.8 million from for the current fiscal year, but then looking forward, we should probably, again, assuming that we want to try and kind of match the need or get that $1 million a month goal, we're looking at another, let's say, $4 million, $5 million to kind of get us through this fiscal year at a rate of about $1 million in rental assistance per
Yes,
month.
roughly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have an amendment to that effect, and I think we're trying to kind of pin down exactly, what we want to add on to that $7.8 million, so that we do have a consistent flow. And I know we were, talking the other day, and my preference would be, I don't want to use up all. I'd like to parcel that out over the 12 months so that there's money available and not have it kind of all go within the. I mean, I'm going to leave that to y'all and the contract and all that. But my sense would be to make sure we don't know what's going to happen down the road. There could be a downturn in the economy. There could be natural disasters. There could be a lot of things that might. And I do completely agree that this is really anti-homelessness funding. I mean, we're preventive. We're trying to make sure that people don't have to relocate and go through all the problem and have their kids go through all the problems and all that kind of stuff like that. And with the $1 million, what's the maximum amount per person in terms of the rental assistance?
Each household has a maximum amount of benefit of $6,000 if they come through the program, and that covers tenant stabilization. It covers perhaps some back rent. It might cover representation at eviction proceedings, maybe some funding to help with relocation. That is not anticipated to be spent for projects that are coming up through the city's tenant relocation ordinance. Mm-hmm. That is a separate contract that we brought to council earlier this year, and it's got a funded amount of about $700,000 to help with folks that are coming up through the tenant relocation ordinance.
And so the difference, then, the tenant relocation assistance funds are going to be for folks that are being displaced. Their apartment complex is being remodeled, is being torn down, wherever the case may be, and we're helping them get from point A to point B. Whereas the emergency rental assistance is for people that their apartment's fine, but their financial situation is not, and they need some help. And in terms of the legal assistance, then, is the Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid also involved in the mix in terms of, or who is providing the legal assistance? Because a lot of these folks are on the verge of eviction, I would imagine, when they're contacting El Buen Samaritano.
I believe Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid is part of the mix there.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I appreciate the answers to the questions, both here and just in other conversations. I greatly support adding to that $7.8 million so that we can really kind of adequately fund rental assistance. I know this is something that I don't think that we funded rental assistance at all in any substantive way up until a handful of years ago. But I really think that we should do it in a steady and regular and ongoing way so that we can have these kind of established contracts and established relationships and kind of perfect the process. And I would just note that the contract we just issued was for a 3-year contract. The 2 years would be pending, funding availability. But I really would encourage us as a body and the city in general to just roll this into kind of our ongoing expenses and obligations. I don't know at what level. 12 million might be I don't know if we can continue to fund it at that level, but I think we have to continue to fund it at some substantive level.
Councilmember, I want to look into this because it's hard for me to understand why we'd have entered into a year contract that runs out in 8 months. Mm-hmm. That's got to be something is amiss in terms of our staff work on that, and I intend to get to the bottom of it. We'll evaluate this, and we certainly don't want to leave anybody getting out of housing because that is the most effective way to keep people in housing. Mm-hmm. But we need to evaluate those numbers to make sure they're realistic.
All right. Well, again, thank you all very much. I appreciate your efforts in this regard. The feedback that we've gotten just anecdotally is that El Buen is doing a good job, and that Trolla is doing a good job, and again, I appreciate y'all's work on it.
Thanks, Councilmember. Councilmember Harper Madison.
Thank you, Mayor, for the recognition. I just wanted to revisit my previous question, and I think this is maybe more part staff but part manager question. I just want to be clear that of our 7 collaborative projects, by nature of how the one that we all know that I'm making reference to, the fact that they won't be able to obtain funding through other services like bonds or tax credits, etc. But this council wants to be sure that this particular project is successful. Do we have to fund it through our general budget? And I'm not sure who that question is for.
So I'm looking at Carrie to see. I know that the type of service that they're providing makes it not qualify for the programs that we administer through the housing department. So how other funding sources that might be available for that, I think, would be a question for finance. And my understanding is it's a gap of about $550,000 in.
And that's ultimately what I'm making reference to is
shelter.
the gap in funding. And I think ultimately what I'm saying is if there is any other possible way that the city could help to fund, that gap, I would like to know what we can commit to. And, moving forward, I want to know, is there a way that I can be advised, and it doesn't have to happen from the dais this morning, but is there a way I can be advised on how to amend our budget so that, to Councilwoman Fuentes' point earlier about preventative services and Councilwoman Kelly's comments about preventative services, like this is essentially this kind of behavioral health programming is exactly what we're talking about. So that extension of being able to really get the full benefit from PSH. Prevention is, I can't remember my grandmother's quote, but I think y'all know what I'm talking about. I don't understand why we can't fill that gap. And so, again, you don't have to answer that question this morning.
So I can commit to is looking into the details of the project. At this moment, I'm not aware, but we will definitely look into the details and get back with you on what options could be available for that project.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Members, unless there's any other questions for in the arena, if you will, of permanent supportive housing, homelessness, and Austin Public Health, without objection, I'll move to public safety generally, police, and then the order I thought I would go in is police and then EMS. So let me ask first, are there any council members that would like for us to bring up people that can answer questions related to APD and the police budget? Councilmember Alter, was that raising your hand or?
I think I need to talk to staff and legal first on something.
Before we do that, okay, fair enough. That's what this day's supposed to be about, is be able to get your questions answered. All right, how about EMS? Is there anybody who would like for me to call up somebody from? Oh, I thought you were pointing at me. I was thinking, look, I kind of know what I want, but yeah, I got it. It's Ryan, the Wizard of Oz up above here, right? Okay, somebody from EMS come down so that
APD.
What?
APD.
Oh, I'm sorry, APD. It doesn't hurt my feelings if you cry out if I'm not recognizing you.
No problem.
Why don't you ask your question and we'll see if somebody. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
So I just have one question. It's about our asset forfeiture rules. I'm just trying to understand when we have asset forfeiture funds, do expenditures from those funds have to receive council approval, same as, whatever budget thresholds when we approve a purchase, or are those funds somehow different rules apply where they can just be spent by the department?
And Mayor, I just want to clarify, I have questions for APH, not on homelessness. You didn't.
Okay, well, that's why I asked. So, all right, we'll call him back up.
If I could, the chief is on his way down, but to answer your question, Councilmember, yes, that is a separate funding process, both state and federal seized funds. The budget's presented to council for budget approval, but the actual purchases are done through purchasing without or after the approval of the budget, then they can make their purchases without council interaction.
And is that by policy or
It's by both the federal statute and the state statute for seized funds. It has to be kept it can't be commingled with city funds. It has to be separate bank accounts for both of those accounts.
thank you.
Any other questions with regard to APD? EMS? Okay, it's my understanding that Councilmember Allison Alter has an additional question for Austin Public Health, so I hope they didn't leave.
I just texted Director Stirrup. I also have a question on Councilmember Vela's question regarding magistration, but I'm not sure.
Okay, I'm trying
That's
to-
public safety, so
Okay,
that's why. Just flagging
Fair
that
enough.
for whenever you get there.
yes, thank you. Yes, Councilmember.
I have a question that for honestly budget, it's a broader question, doesn't quite fit in the category. Language access has been a real priority for myself and my staff, and I think we do a decent job of the language access. That said, with the budget document, there is no, let me rephrase that. Is there a Spanish version of the budget document?
No, there isn't a Spanish version of the document.
And I understand it's a huge document, and I understand that translating the entire document is going to be a big effort. That said, I would really love to see at least the summary where y'all are hitting all the kind of those main points in those kind of like first 60, 70 pages, the city manager's message, those kinds of things like that. If we could have at the very least kind of a Spanish version, potentially other languages. Again, I would let the CPIO and the city figure out which are the best. But obviously, Spanish is a huge language here in Austin. It would really help, and I think it would really, for those folks who are monolingual Spanish speakers, just having that kind of summary document is one place to go where you can just kind of flip through and see the major kind of headlines and where the emphasis and the focus is. So I just wanted to put that out there. Obviously, it's kind of late in this budget process, but moving down the road, it would be great to, as much as we possibly can, provide Spanish language documents as part of the budget process.
Thank you, Council Member. That's definitely something we can look into for even as we prepare the approved budget. There may be portions that we can look at translating and in future budget development cycles.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Councilmember Kelly has a question related to Homeland Security and emergency management. Do we have somebody that can, well, why don't you ask your question and we'll see how we get that answered.
Yeah, so there's a lot of interest in my community specifically. Hi, Director Snipes. And thank you so much for attending the first day of the class that I taught last week. But we taught 18 students successfully community emergency preparedness training. And my question number 36 was specifically about the preparedness efforts of HSEM. And what I'd like to know is if you could explain to the community what investments in our budget are related to community preparedness. I got some of those questions while I was training the class over the last 3 days. And thank you to all the other public safety units that came out to help successfully teach that. I really appreciated it. So.
Council member, thank you for that question. Ken Snipes, Director, Homeland Security and Emergency Management. There are quite a few items that will be moving forward for helping the community prepare and become more resilient. As it relates to programs like CERT training, we're certainly looking at that program and already exploring opportunities to add that to some of the upcoming work that we're going to be doing. And we've talked quite a bit about some of the things that we're doing with the, for example, our drop-ins and our other work that we're doing with our communities, where we're bringing that information to the communities and helping them understand what's available and what they can take advantage of.
I did see in your response to the budget question that you are developing a 1 to 2 hour condensed emergency preparedness training class. And I noticed that as a city as a whole, we kind of lack like senior access to emergency preparedness. I think that's a really unique niche, but there are a lot of elderly individuals in the community. And so I'm wondering if that might be something possibly in the future you might be able to work on.
Yes, Councilmember, absolutely. And all of our vulnerable populations, we'll kind of work on some plans for them as well. But we have some things already in the hopper, and those will be coming out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for explaining that so that we can get it out to the community. As you know, community resilience and preparedness is near and dear to my heart, so I appreciate your answer today. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Sorry, thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Is Councilmember Fuentes, do you have a question on this?
Yes, Director Snipes. Actually, I just wanted you, I saw that there's an interactive map with cooling centers located, and just wanted to see if you wanted to speak to that, because I thought that that was a really cool value add for us to offer our communities.
Right. So, Councilmember, thank you for that. So the interactive map for cooling systems, cooling centers is another one of those products that we're creating to make sure that people have an understanding of what may be available to them in their communities. And we're trying to make it easier for people to understand where they can take advantage of those types of activities. It's been really important with the onset of the heat wave that we're dealing with right now to make it more widely known where people can go to cool off.
Yes, and I appreciate your leadership. I mean, that's the type of innovative, creative ways that I would like to see our city government engage in more of, and so I'm really pleased to see that out for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you, Director. I thought I saw APH come back in the room. Did I? All right, why don't you come forward, and I'll recognize Councilmember Allison Alter.
Thank you, and I may also have one for EMS that I
Okay, well, I'll
didn't
come
see
back to
before.
that.
Thank you.
All right.
Good morning. Thank you for being here.
Sit-
So in questions 1 and 6 that I submitted, they were asking kind of what grant funding would be disappearing by the end of this year. And there's millions and millions of dollars of APH grant funding that is ending in Q3 and Q4 of fiscal year 24, as outlined in the answers to those questions, and I think in answer to a question that Councilmember Fuentes had as well. Can you speak to how many staff will be impacted? I mean, some of this is COVID money, and it might just be like we're moving on from the pandemic, but I'm trying to understand the potential impact to the public health services from those gaps.
Good morning, Kimberly Maddox, Assistant Director for Austin Public Health. So for some of those grants that are ending throughout fiscal 24, the staffing for many of those, we are going to continue with our ARPA allocation. So those staff would be continued through December of 24. So it's just a few months, but it does get us through the end of the fiscal year. I can go back and get you a more detailed answer on any of the programming that's going to end. Off the top of my head, I can't answer that, but I can go get those answers for you and bring them back to you in just a few moments.
Okay, that would be helpful. And then on a specific area that just recently came to my attention as we were trying to think about gaps in our STI response, and I'm a co-sponsor on an amendment of Councilmember Velasquez, was that the DSHS recently announced some state cuts to public health that are going to impact our STI and disease response work. Can you speak to what happened and what concerns APH may have about our capacity as the public health, I guess, I don't know if you call authority, to respond?
So I know of, and Kathy DeLeon's here, she may be able to give more. I know that the DIS funding was supplemental funding that was during the pandemic. That is coming to an end. That does currently fund 3 staff persons that works in the STI, and I can let Cassie give you more programmatic detail.
Good morning, Cassie De Leon, Austin Public Health. To answer the question, we did get a notification from the Department of State Health Services. There are federal pass-through funds that we received for disease intervention specialist supplemental. And what we are aware of is that come December 31st, there are 3 positions within Austin Public Health that are going to be affected by those funds ceasing to be allocated to Austin Public Health. And so we are looking to see what what do we have within our department to shore those up, and have made some adjustments to make sure that we don't see a change in service or capacity for this fiscal year.
Okay, so you have resolved that issue and figured out a way forward, or is that something that we need to consider?
We do for this next fiscal year. We do have capacity with ARPA to be able to extend those positions for the remaining months within the fiscal year.
Great, thank you. And when you do have the answers to the other question, I just want to understand if, we're going to be laying a bunch of people off, or, we have lots of vacancies all over, and, just making sure that we have the public health need. So at the appropriate time when you have an answer, that would be appreciated. And Mayor, I'm sorry, I didn't have my notes organized exactly how you were doing it, but I do have a question for EMS and related to magistration and public safety when appropriate.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I had a quick one about public health, and I
Okay,
apologize for my voice today.
Fair enough. Public health, if you'd come back up, we'll try to get all this completed before we go to the next item.
I can tell you're working very hard to try to keep us
I'm
on
trying,
the same topic,
I'm
but we put in a Q&A about the Workforce First program. Do you know if that line item is being sustained or increased this year? Or is that one we should just wait on? I know that's run through a public health contract.
Workforce First. Sorry. Assistant Director Laura LaFuente will have those details for you.
Yes, that is a collaborative grant. So there is $295,000 from Austin Public Health. We are working to confirm the amount from the other departments that contribute toward the larger contract.
Okay, fantastic. We'll wait for that answer in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Anything else on public health? All right, EMS, if you'd make your way down, and while they're coming down, I'll recognize Councilmember Allison Alter.
Thank you. Good morning, Chief Lickritz. As you know, we've been working to try and improve the revenue process and the billing system for EMS. I noticed that in the budget, it says that there's been it projects a revenue increase of about $4 million, or a 9.3% from the budgeted level in the prior year. It attributes that to an increased number of transports, which we may very well have an increased number of transport, but how are we doing on those revenue management efforts, which were supposed to bring us more revenue?
Yes, we're prepared to come to speak to you at the September Audit and Finance Committee to give you a full breakdown of all of the efforts that we've done. But at this point, we have nearly completed the full backlog that we've had. Last count, a couple weeks ago, when we looked, it was less than 5,000 transports that were remaining to be billed. And so we do anticipate that that backlog should be completed within the next several months. And we continue to work through some of the other processes in terms of improving documentation and billing compliance, implementing some of those procedures in terms of real-time evaluation of completeness of documentation, real-time assurance. We are getting our documents done in a timely manner, and timely filings, and all of those various things that we've spoken about at length. I'm happy to present you with a more in-depth presentation.
Thank you. I look forward to the more in-depth presentation, but, is that money going to get, is that getting credited in fiscal year 23 and then just washed into the general fund? We had, as a council, determined that we wanted that funding to go back into EMS for retention and recruitment, but it seems to be a little bit of a black box where that money is if this $4 million increase is attributed to transport fees as opposed to the increase in revenue.
We've been very successful this year in our revenue cycle management. We have seen a dramatic increase. We are coming in over budget for our projected revenue for fiscal year 23, and that is why we are projecting a higher revenue for next year. As to the specifics as to how that was allocated, I would defer to my colleagues in finance.
Hi, yeah, that's $4 million budget to budget. It's about they're expected to work through the $4 million backlog. So when we look at the estimate, I think it's only about $2 million growth. So we're expecting to see that full backlog worked off in FY23. So the actual transport impact is only about $2 million.
Okay, so the estimate is going to be even higher than what was in
the estimate in the budget reflects working off the backlog entirely in FY23, resulting in $4 million in revenue, some of which was anticipated in the budget, but not all. Probably about an extra $2 million above the budgeted estimate for that component of their revenue.
Okay, but that's already in the budgeted estimate.
That's already reflected in the estimate and flows through to the reserve calculation for FY24, yes.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to the presentation in
Thank you.
September.
Council members, what I'm going to do is, I'm not sure who the question will be for, but I'll recognize Councilmember Allison Alter. She has a question related to magistration, and so I'm going to put that in the public safety category. What I anticipate we will do is I'll ask if anybody has any questions about fire after this, after magistration question, fire, then I'm going to go to PARD, and then we'll go to general fund departments, and I'll kind of read those out, so as you want to prepare your notes. So why don't you ask your question, and we'll figure out who we need to get.
Thank you, and I'll just say I do have some questions broadly about vacancies that may be, all departments, so just flagging that. Okay, so in question, there was a question from Councilmember Vela for item 97 that asked about additional magistration costs for council at first appearance program, and the answer just says that there's $600,000 in one-time funding included to support additional magistration costs. I wanted to understand what that $600,000 was for.
That's a contract. Ed Vanino, Chief Financial Officer. That's an anticipated increase in the contract that we have with the county for those services.
Okay, so
The county's presented us with a bill that's a bit more than what we have in this budget, and we're in the process of negotiating that number.
That's correct.
okay, thank you. And I'll just add, I know we had public health before, and it may be in here. I'm still waiting for an answer, and it may be in here, and I haven't seen it yet. There was a big reduction in what the county was paying us for our public health, which I'm still waiting to understand. As they charge us more and we charge them less, it concerns me.
Going to get on that.
Okay, anybody have any questions related to fire? All right, then we'll go to Parks and Recreation Department. Does anybody have any questions related to Parks and Recreation Department? Yes, Councilmember Vela.
I just wanted to, well, I'll wait for the director to get up here. And actually, before that, I just wanted to also congratulate Parks and say thank you for the pool situation. It could not have come at a better time in terms of we have all the pools open, all hours. I think just about all parts of the pools too. Because I mean, I've seen, like, for example, Bartholomew. Sometimes the slides won't be open, or this part won't be open, or whatever the case may be. But I think all of the pools have been open. Critically needed during, one of the, if not the hottest summers we've ever had. And anyway, I just wanted to say that I know it's hard to staff those up and get them open, and I know we've struggled in the past, but I think the $20 an hour minimum wage helped tremendously, as did the addition of some full-time permanent lifeguards. And I just wanted to follow up with you, Director McNeely, about that. Just about I know last year you had mentioned that in discussions surrounding moving some of the lifeguards, they were before. Just to do a little bit of background for the folks that were not here last year. All lifeguards were temporary employees, even the ones that worked year-round. But now we've created, I believe, 13 permanent full-time lifeguard positions that essentially staff the, Barton Springs, Shipe, a handful of other pools that are open. I'm sorry, not Shipe, Stacy, Big Stacy, and a handful of other pools that are open year-round. And I know you had previously mentioned that you wanted to get to about, 25 or 30 kind of, full-time permanent lifeguards. And I just wanted to ask you, how are you feeling about the lifeguard situation? Where are we at with the lifeguards?
Sure. Kimberly McNeely, serving as the Director for Parks and Recreation. So that conversation occurred last year, I believe, when we were having conversations about the Parks and or about the swimming pool and the aquatic facilities. So 13 lifeguards have certainly been very helpful in making sure that we have our year-round pools staffed appropriately, opening on time without delay, and all parts of the swimming pools open. Increased number of full-time lifeguards certainly helps with the reliability of our operation. However, we have been successful. Obviously, this year we've been very successful in opening our swimming pools with the living wage and the bonus structure that we've had, and we intend to build upon that success next year. So I say all that to say that, of course, our previous estimate still stands, but we've obviously been able to, as we've tested this year with our new structure of a $20 living wage and $20.80 next year, we've proved that it's very possible to continue to operate effectively and efficiently, even with temporary employees.
Got it. So you feel pretty comfortable moving forward. Let me rephrase that. Do you feel comfortable moving forward that the $20 soon to be $20.80 is enough to fill the lifeguard positions that you need, looking to next year?
We feel fairly confident. So yes, we feel fairly confident.
And I know in conversations, my staff has been talking to you, and we've been talking as well. But you really kind of prioritized actually. Security and maintenance seems to be, the greatest, need or kind of, a priority from your perspective. How are you feeling about that? In terms of, not just the pools, but the general park system, moving forward.
Yeah. So the reason why safety and security is the two top priorities, which, by the way, you, Council, in the proposed budget, there is already funding for both of those things. But the reason why those are the most important is because when you take a look at our performance measures and when you take a look at data that comes in through our 311 calls and data that comes in through our CAF system, and also just the general number of complaints that come into the office, those are the places that we are receiving the most concerns from our constituency, and our performance measure went from in the mid-70s for people feeling as though the grounds of the park system, or that the park system, it's how well it looked, aesthetically pleasing it was. It went from the mid-70s down to the upper 60s, and so it's obvious that we need to do a little bit better job there. So therefore, those are the two. And I think that sometimes safety and security and the way that the grounds look, those two things go together. When individuals see trash and those sorts of things, they automatically think, oh, their impression is that perhaps this isn't as safe a place as I thought it was. So they go hand in hand.
Well, I appreciate that, and I that's a high concern for the public as well. Just cleanliness, safety of the parks, clean bathrooms, trash cans that are emptied and maintained. I'm glad to see that the base budget, I think, had some funding for that, and that's hopefully that will help the parks with maintenance. Our parks get a lot of love and a lot of use. That's all I had. I just wanted to touch base about that. Thank you very much, Director.
Councilmember Kelly, I think she has a question about parks.
Yes, thank you. So as you're aware, we have a very great cemetery advocate in my district, and I wanted to thank you for being at that meeting and for helping facilitate it. But I think on a broader spectrum, out of that came to me the idea that not a lot of people know what the city does with cemeteries. And so I was wondering if you might be able to explain in this public setting, are there any new positions for cemetery maintenance in the budget?
There are no new positions for cemetery maintenance in this particular budget. However, last year we did reclassify internally within our budget. We reclassified 4 positions for cemetery maintenance to help bolster our ability to take care of the cemeteries.
Thank you. And it's my understanding that we do have multiple contractors that go out to the cemeteries to do the work. I'm wondering if maybe in future budgets we might be able to consider bringing on employees to take over those positions as a possible way to save money. Do you think that's something that we might be able to look into more?
That is absolutely a longer term goal. It actually, if anyone was here several years ago, you'll remember that the Parks and Recreation Department had set in motion motion that exact idea of being able to bring the internments in-house. And so we have right now, we are interning for children and infants. However, we still need a little more time to become better equipped and better able to do internments for adults. And so therefore, over time, as we learn how to do that, we'll be able to consider bringing those positions in-house and eliminating the need for a contract, which would mean that contractual dollars would then be spent directly on City of Austin employees. But it'll just take us a little more time to get there.
Do you have any idea how long that might take?
We're looking for the next about a year and a half.
Okay, that's not too bad of a timeline. I was thinking initially maybe like 5 years down the road, how might we be able to expedite this? Because long term, if we're able to do those types of internments and bring on staff, I think investing in the staff at the city would be a much better use of those dollars fiscally. And then I was just wondering, finally, thank you so much for being up here. I'm sorry to blindside you on it. But what kind of maintenance staffing needs are still something that you see needed in the budget, or what do you have that you might need further? Do you have any unmet needs with maintenance, I guess, is a better way to say it?
Yeah, so in the proposed budget, we have some temporary employees that we're going to be able to staff up as needed to be, and we also have some money for additional equipment or transportation for those individuals. That will help us get through this year, and then we will continue to evaluate what the needs are, and perhaps in future budgets come back with additional asks. In years past, so if you look historically at our asks, we have traditionally asked for in upwards of 6 positions per year for maintenance. So those are still positions that would be utilized should we ever receive them. But right now we are prepared to work within the temporary system that we have.
Okay, and I just have one follow-up question that I forgot to ask earlier related to cemeteries. How many cemeteries does the city operate, and how many, internments would you say you do yearly?
I'll have to get back to you on the internments that we do yearly, and I'm counting on my fingers. We have Austin Memorial, Oakwood Annex, Evergreen, Plumbers, and I feel like there's one more that I'm missing, so I believe we have 6. I just can't think of the 6th one.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other questions with Councilmember Allison Alter?
Well, I would, and this is maybe a conversation for later, but you have a lot of priorities that you have to grapple with during the budget process. But I would say that when you think about some of the kind of the base work that we do that's fundamental, recreation and libraries are key. And at least in my past experiences, those departments, because of the funding pressures, and it's the funding pressures from a whole lot of areas, those get limited. And so you get the concept of you're facility rich but cash poor. In other words, you've got a lot of stuff to take care of, and not enough resources to take care of the things we built, the parks we've acquired, the libraries we've acquired, the branches that we have. So I do think at some point, through our building services and through our grounds maintenance that we do owe council a comprehensive report about all those needs, so that when you weigh budget priorities for next year, you understand the demands that are being placed on our system, on our facilities by our citizens that use these services, and what kind of funding we may need to be thinking about in a long-term basis.
Thank you. Councilmember Allison Alter.
Thank you. I want to join Councilmember Vela in congratulating you and your staff again on the lifeguards, and looking to other cities and the struggles they're having not being able to have the pools open, and how much those pools are meeting for our community. Proud of the work that we did together last year to really change the dynamic and make the investments that we needed. So congratulations on that. Can you repeat the performance measures related to maintenance and where we were and where
we were in the mid-70s. I think the number specifically was 74, and we are now down to the upper 60s, the number being 68%, which just means that 68% of the people responding to the surveys felt as though the grounds and the park system appeared to be appropriately cared for.
Okay. And I know that, I think many of us are hearing more and more complaints about security and maintenance in our parks, particularly in our parking lots, and in terms of security, and then just the maintenance issues. So if you could share those performance measures with us, I would appreciate that. I want to go back to, a question that I raised when we had the discussion about, I think it was the capital budget or when we did the general funds, which is we've added almost 500 acres of park land in this last fiscal year, and we are adding 0 FTEs to maintenance. So, I appreciate that for the first time I'm seeing, very specifics that we're adding staffing for Givens and the Mexican American Cultural Center. But we have to understand that these land spaces are part of our parks system and they require maintenance. Some of those have playgrounds and other things that need to be maintained. Others are just, open spaces at this point in time. So, it was something like $395,000 that was added for the O&M for your capital expenditures in the past, yet we have 500 acres. So that seems like a really small amount for 500 acres. I know there's something like 200,000 for additional maintenance. But how is it that we are handling the O&M related to land purchases? Is there a formula for that?
So the Parks and Recreation Department puts together a formula and prioritizes its needs and then brings that information forward. And it is considered against all the other really important needs of the city. So yes, there is a formula. Yes, it is given its due consideration, but there is only a finite amount of money, which then is determined to be distributed among all the many needs of the department.
So I understand that, but, from our and this is not, this is a more of a question of what, how budget has to approach things and the city manager, we ought to be saying, we're bringing on this land, there's this much money per acre that has to go in to maintenance moving forward, and we may need to go back and do some backlog work to fix that because we haven't been appropriately investing in the O&M to maintain the lands that we are putting forward. Every other department, because they're bricks and mortar, they get the people to be in the bricks and mortar when that bricks and mortar opens. But our community is vastly using our parks more than they're using these other spaces, and yet we are not doing the most basic maintenance. So I don't have a fix for this in this budget, but city manager, as you're thinking about, coming back to help us understand how we're shortchanging parks or libraries, this is part of the problem for both parks and libraries is the O&M formulas that go with that capital budget. And, for colleagues who are interested, I'm thinking of bringing in an item from council sometime in the fall, and we'll not have it, together for next week, that really pushes this forward because we cannot continue at this pace. Unfortunately, our land purchases are going to go down because we're going to lose the parkland dedication flow of funds, but we still have to make up this backlog and figure out how we are going to fund the parks that are being loved to death as we grow. And as we are more urban and we have less, spaces, these parks are going to become that much more important and they're going to be that much more loved, and we have to make sure that they are maintained. So I want to thank Councilmember Ellis for putting forward an amendment that provides some additional maintenance this year. I hope our colleagues will consider joining me in co-sponsoring that. I think that's very important. I think we could do more than that, but we're trying to be reasonable in the ask in the scheme of things. But I think it's very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Mayor Pro Tem and then Councilmember Harper Madison.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I will add on to the congratulations about having all the pools open this year. I know 3 of us are former lifeguards, and so we always like to make sure we've shared that information for folks who have an interest in public service at any level. But we're really happy over the years since COVID, when the pools had to shut down, that we were able to rebuild that pipeline of lifeguards and other people that work in our parks and recreation facilities. I do have Ellis Amendment 2 has been posted, and it is about those FTE positions, temporary full-time positions. As we know that a lot of departments have struggled with vacancies and trying to understand the right level of budgeting for full-time staff and balancing what is one-time funds versus ongoing funds. Can you talk a little bit about the need for security through our park system? I know, I think it was last budget cycle, we had done some work mostly about who was managing kind of the assessment of security needs for some of the buildings, making sure we had, a person who had all the keys and knew exactly if something needed to be open or shut or locked or unlocked, that we had that. Are these personnel needs that you might need this year, or are these more of fencing, lighting, locks, and other things that are more like capital funds rather than the personnel that go with those?
They are both, and we will make good use of any amount of funding that we have been that has been provided to us in the proposed budget. So we have seen an uptick of just bad decision making and poor behaviors throughout the park system this year. Through our vacancy savings this year, we placed 10 cameras in 10 different locations, and they are mobile, so we have been able to move some of them in other areas to be able to monitor what is happening. We've been working very directly with our friends in APD who have helped us to monitor those and be able to identify individuals who are making bad choices and then have corrective action for that. I don't know what that corrective action is, but it's in the law enforcement area, so that's why I can't speak exactly what happens, but I know that they are addressing that. We have hired overtime officers to be in certain locations within our park system where we know that bad behaviors or people are violating ordinances on a regular basis. In your own district, you had some bad choices where individuals physically moved boulders so that they could get onto the soccer field. So that individual that we had hired last year for safety and security was working on an assessment of the entire park system to talk about gates. We're starting with gates. What would it cost for electronic gates? How might we be able to secure some of our park system? We're supplementing that with cameras and then giving that information to APD. We are in some cases hiring off-duty officers overtime officers, and or security guards in certain areas where we believe that it's most appropriate so that people will still continue and want to access the space. And there's more of that to be done. We did have a basic security assessment of our buildings, and so we know what those costs associated with those costs and how we would phase those over time to be able to make sure that our buildings are more secure. And any additional funding that we receive would go to any of those things, either equipment or personnel, based upon what we're assessing is the need in that particular area. We're also working with a not-for-profit partner who is considering funding an actual overall park system assessment that will give us even more information about how to make our spaces more appear and be perceived as more safe. So not only be safe in the real time, but also being perceived that way. So we're hoping that we gather all of that information along with the preliminary information, and we'll be able to create make some real good decisions that are permanent and temporary. Some things might have to be temporary as we learn more, so that everybody will feel safe coming to the park system. And we're doing that now with vacancy savings, and then next year with the proposed budget, there will be some specific money infused into safety and security that we'll be able to use for implementation.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate your coordination with us on the situation we had in District 8. I am bringing a budget amendment specifically to address the needs of the safety and access in the Circle C Metro Park, mostly because I wasn't familiar with the needs of all parks and didn't want to make it a big umbrella statement about what that process should look like. But we have had individuals multiple times enter those fields and essentially destroy all or parts of the soccer fields, which is unfortunate when you think about how much time and energy we put into making sure those spaces are accessible for everyone, and then to have people make those fields unusable for folks was really unfortunate, to say the least. So one of the amendments does address that particular issue, and I know we've had issues with the Bellaway and things like that just over the years that we've been trying to address. So I know it's on your radar, and we want to do what we can as a council to help with that. So if there's anything that other folks know are situations, I'd be happy to look into it and help, but wanted to keep this amendment very specific to just one problem we're trying to solve. My last question for you is just going to be about, during the winter storm of this February, PARD had a lot of detrimental impacts with debris and tree branches and cleanup. Have y'all been reimbursed through FEMA dollars for the work that you do, or how does that work when you put so much time and energy into trying to mitigate the debris damage?
So we participate in the same process that the rest of the city does to put together the estimates of what the recovery costs are, and then we submit that to FEMA and
Actually, our Homeland Services Emergency Management Department leads those efforts to get the application and the information to FEMA, and it is a long-term process. So any cost that we've incurred this year, it will probably be, I think we are anticipating maybe 2025 seeing some of those dollars back, and they'll go back into the general fund reserves.
So if I could just add to what Carrie said, it's usually a 75% reimbursement rate, and because it's so, it takes that amount of time for FEMA to reimburse you, and it's in the next fiscal year. It's not, historically, you can't reimburse for the year that you've already spent, so it ends up, that money ends up being part of the general fund collection of revenue that we've received that particular year.
Okay, interesting. I guess that makes sense procedurally, just because you can't go back and put money into a budget from years ago. But it is unfortunate that, resource recovery and PARD and all of the other departments that work in debris mitigation after these storms essentially just have to re-strategize what the budget for the year will actually be able to cover. Is that kind of how this works, with that many years of gap in between the money spent and the money being recouped?
Well, you may recall for ARR, we did a transfer from the General Fund Emergency Reserve to cover some of their extraordinary expenses. I think it was $15.3 million. So we tried to absorb a lot of that impact by using the reserves. For COVID, we did the same thing often when we had hundreds of millions of dollars of unanticipated expenses. With respect to PARD, they had a few million in expenses. We looked at that versus their anticipated estimated spend for the year and found that they were going to be able to absorb it. And so there is no need to transfer those expenses to the reserves. It's being funded out of ongoing savings this year. And then when we ultimately get a reimbursement, it'll be posted to the general fund reserves.
And we work closely with the departments. If they anticipate those charges will result in them going over budget, then we'll start looking at whether or not we need to transfer from the reserves. But as the charges are incurring, of course, the department takes on those expenses, and we work closely with them throughout the year to see where they land. And so in some cases, like in PARD's case this year, we thought that they would be able to manage it because of the amount of savings they were generating. In future years, we'll just make sure we work closely to see how that plays out for each department.
Yeah. So in the past, the Parks and Recreation Department has relied upon the budget office to help us find money in reserves, and we've not ever been in a situation where they have not been able to help us maintain our budget for that given year.
Okay, I really appreciate that level of depth on how the transfer of money and over the years actually plays out in real time. Manager, is this part of why the reserve process is something you're wanting to adjust this year?
Yeah, absolutely. When you think of, in 21, we had Uri. In 23, you had Mara. Mm-hmm. Both of those, and I think the people that are in this prognostication, that's going to be, those are events that are going to happen with more frequency. And that's why those reserves are so critical, so that we can be flexible enough and resilient enough to be able to address those. I think the bigger question that you and maybe the council members might be interested in is when you respond to a storm like that, that means your routine work program that you have to do, maintenance of parkland, the maintenance of playscapes, et cetera, may suffer because what you've got to do is deploy resources to deal with that emergency. And so we get behind, and we get behind as a result of those things. And so I think what we owe to the mayor and council is really a report that details all the infrastructure, the asset management. In my 5 months now, almost 6 months here, those kinds of basic core issues have been crowded out by homeless, by affordability, by transportation, by public safety. And really what we owe is to try to put this issue before the whole council so that those get the airplay along with these other important priorities, just to understand what you're trying to balance here, so that when you are doing the budget, you understand how those resources can be used to try to achieve some outcome.
I know that when we talk about reserves, it seems like, we stow away our acorns for a rainy day, but the truth is with climate change and, potential wildfires and storms and flooding, it just seems the need to make sure we've got a strong reserve system is something that we need to focus on very carefully.
And again, to keep reemphasizing, we do have a cap that we suffer, or that we have as a governmental agency, as does the county and other jurisdictions. And that's something that is at some point, once Ed has talked about, once the sales tax begins to moderate itself and slow down, that pinch is going to get felt. It may not be in the next year, but it's going to get felt eventually. And then we'll have to be prepared for how we deal with those events.
Thank you.
Councilmember, I've been requested by a couple of council members so that they could be at an event at noon. Would it be okay? I've got Councilmember Harper Madison, I've got Councilmember Allison Alter wishing to speak. Would it be okay if we recess so that we can have a lunch break and come back, let's say at 1, and then take this topic back up? Or do you want to go ahead and talk now?
I'll be really, really quick. If I can.
Then Councilmember Harper Madison.
It will lose the train.
Councilmember Harper Madison and then Councilmember Allison Alter.
And I'll be brief as well. I'll pose it as statements as opposed to questions, but I just wanted to say specifically along the lines of this topic of conversation, I really appreciate Councilmember Alter's commitment to parks and rec centers and spaces that, are super critical to our community. So I would absolutely love to work with you and Mayor Pro Tem Ellis on any of those efforts moving forward. But my statement is more along the lines of just watching how spaces like the Carver Library, for example, it largely serves as after-school care. The kids in my district in the O2, they go straight to the Carver after school, and Ms. Doreen, shout out to Ms. Doreen, ends up being an after-school care provider because the kids don't have anywhere else to go. So I'd like to bring that up and just say, moving forward, I'll ask the question when we have more time about how we can shed some light on the dilemma that places like the Carver face without programmatic efforts that really help folks like Ms. Doreen. And then lastly, I'd like to say in light of the MAC being temporarily closed for renovations, I think the Carver could be a great space for them to be able to relocate temporarily. And I'd like to move forward with some Q&A around how we can do that. And then lastly, spaces like the Millennium Youth Entertainment Complex. I would love to know, oftentimes, especially with this inclement condition, these kids are hanging out in 104-degree weather because they don't have anywhere to go. But we have all this park space that's wide open and air conditioned. I just want to make sure that we're putting some effort towards, how we can invest in those spaces. I'd also like to say, Director McNeely, one of the hardest working ladies in show business, I really appreciate all your continued efforts and your commitment. Thank you.
Councilmember Allison Alter.
Thank you. I just want to point out when we're talking about the Storm Mara damage from the trees in our parks, we have a 65-year wait before you actually trim a tree, which is why we had a lot of damage when we had the ice. And so doing the maintenance earlier is really important when you have the disasters because you have less damage from them. And so, we really have to be looking holistically at these issues and understanding the backlog is there and their consequences for that. Next time I hope we can reimburse PARD from the reserves and let them spend on the maintenance and do the other things that they need to get done rather than making them have to figure out how to do it in their budget. And it should be more even across departments. Thank you.
Thank you. Without objection, the City Council is recessed. It is 11:53. We are recessed until 1 o'clock p.m. Order the Austin City Council for this budget work session. It is 1 o'clock p.m. on August 8th, 2023, and we continue to meet in the City Council chambers located at Austin City Hall, which is located at 301 West 2nd Street in Austin, Texas. We have a quorum of the City Council present, And what we will do is, what I tried to do earlier today is go through those items that had received the most questions, and I think we've gone through all of those. So what I'll do now is ask council members if they have a specific area they want to ask questions about, and then what I'll hopefully will be able to do is if a council member says, I want to talk about X, we get folks down, they can answer questions, and we all stay on X until we've exhausted that, kind of like what we attempted to do this morning. So with that, Councilmember Fuentes.
Thank you, Mayor. I have questions regarding our CIP program within Austin Transportation Public Works Department. I also have questions to our planning department.
Well, hang on. What I'm going to try to do is get the
One at a
CIP
time?
question. Yeah,
Okay.
that way what we can do is get people down, get everybody questions answered, and then we'll go to the next item. Is that okay?
That works for me.
Good deal. So Public Works and Transportation. Why don't you ask your question and we'll see if we can get that answered.
Okay, so my question is in continuation of the conversation that we had last time with Director Mendoza. We had in the presentation, in our budget proposal, we have about a little under $300 million in the CIP spending plan. And so my questions are focused on how many FTEs we have that are focused on the implementation side of things within the department. And have we considered adding additional FTEs if that means that we're able to scale the rate in which we can expend our CIP dollars? I tried to drag that out as long as I could.
Yeah, Mr. Mendoza, if you'd come down, Mr. Mendoza, or whoever.
Thank you, and I'll repeat the question. It is focused on, we are projected to spend a little under $300 million in our CIP spending plan for this proposed budget, and my question is if you could talk us through our FTE capacity when it comes to implementation staff and any considerations that were made by the division for increasing internal FTE so that we can accelerate our pace.
Thank you, council members. Richard Mendoza, Interim Director for the Transportation and Public Works Department. Yes, every year we go through a workload analysis to see, to ensure that we have the appropriate resources in terms of project managers, construction inspectors, construction managers, working in close partnership with the Capital Delivery Services Department. Our annual CIP, around that $300 million, consists of a variety of programs that are delivered through different work groups. Within the Transportation Public Works Department itself, we have an in-house capital delivery division that focuses on the portfolio of primarily the local mobility and active mobility projects. So these are the new sidewalks, the new urban trails, the new safe routes to school programs, the intersection safety and programs that support Vision Zero. So that spanned for this upcoming budget year is maybe 25% of that total, $300 million. I can get you the exact number. And so within that team, we have our own project managers and also construction managers to ensure those programs are being implemented on time and on budget.
My question is more, and perhaps our finance team can jump in here. How much was our CIP spending plan last fiscal year for within these two?
Last fiscal year, it was slightly higher. It was on the order of around $350 million. Now, that is a combination of both the local programs that the Transportation Public Works Department itself manages and also the larger CIP programs, namely from the 2016 corridor program that Capital Delivery Services has now been consolidated and uniform in one department to focus on expediting that delivery. They're working very aggressively this year to complete that. We also have a significant projects from 2018 and 2020. The Longhorn Dam is one of those that are going to be going into final design. Redbud Trail Bridge, Barton Springs Bridge. We have some substandard streets, Knuckles Crossing, that are moving forward. And so what we do there is we enlist the services of the Capital Delivery Services Department, and they have their own complement of project managers, some in-house design and construction managers. I'm very familiar with them. I used to be over that division. And I know on an annual basis, they perform services for more than just mobility. They also support Watershed Protection, Austin Water, Parks and Rec, and every year they go through an exercise in forecasting what the next year's CIP is for two reasons: to ensure that we're resourced and we have the positions in-house, or a combination of in-house and staff augmentation to fully deliver those projects on time and on schedule. But then also to recalculate.
She has a specific question.
Yeah,
Yes,
what I'm trying to get a sense of, if last fiscal year we had spent $320 million in our CIP spending plan, we know that we still have about 700 in mobility bonds that have not been spent yet. We have more than $1 billion worth of new sidewalk needs, new corridor needs, new, transportation infrastructure needs. I'm trying to see, with this the manager proposed the Capital Services Delivery Division, with this new division that was done with the intention of expediting delivery, how come our CIP spending plan for this year is not greater?
Councilmember, let me make an attempt on that. I think maybe James can add some additional detail here. That just got stood up, so it's in its infancy. One is the rate of spend depends on how fast we've engineered things or used architectural services of appropriate architectural companies, and so that's in the process of being worked through. And so the capital requirement it depends on the work that's been done, that's ready to roll, that the projects are ready to go. That's what drives that number. And so I think as we get more and more experience with respect to the capital delivery, we'll be able to give you a more a definite estimate of how those. But those estimates are based on what's ready to go, and it isn't. We can't spend faster than we design and get ready to build, acquire property, things of that nature. Those are the drivers on this, and either James or Robert can add to additional detail to that.
And I guess, and thank you for that clarification, City Manager. I'm trying to think through this from what if we had more implementation staff within the department? Would that allow us to increase the rate of delivery?
Robert?
Sure, Robert Good, Interim Assistant City Manager. Appreciate your question, because you're doing the same thing we're trying to do, is how can we accelerate? And we looked at your question, and from a staffing standpoint, from the transportation user fee, they're a sponsor department. That wouldn't help any. And the capital delivery services side, that's the implementer. And those folks they're funded by the capital projects themselves. So we don't need more staff there. As the manager said, we just need to increase our efficiency. So we think we're appropriately staffed in this budget to make those improvements to start accelerating the program. You might not see it this year, but the years coming will increase dramatically.
Okay.
So thank you for that support.
That's
President.
helpful. And I would just, as the department does your internal analysis and you're able to have those forecasts or estimates of how we're able to accelerate, I think I would certainly be interested in a mid-year budget amendment, whatever is necessary. So
And we have planned to come back to Audit and Finance and start setting that stage for here's the new schedule, and then report progress on that. So we would absolutely do that if we need more staffing or resources to implement it even faster. We'll come back and ask you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Anybody else have questions with regard to transportation and public works? All right. Councilmember Fuentes, you indicated you were ready with something else.
Yes, this is for the planning department. My question, thank you, yes, Director Pratt. I wanted to ask about the Imagine Austin plan. If there was consideration to an update, I think there's $3 million allocated for the Imagine Austin update. If you can provide some context around that allocation, and well, I guess I'll start there. Some context, please.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Lauren Middleton Pratt, Director of Planning. So the $3 million will be slated for staff augmentation, community engagement, related expenses, and looking at our current zoning, looking at potentially new zoning. If you recall on the Gantt chart, we have a large body of work that will require comprehensive planning. So compatibility, again, town zoning, that was one that was brought up that we've heard from the Planning Commission that they'd really like for us to look into. And so anything that we've identified as comprehensive, the need for comprehensive planning, we'll do that within that Imagine Austin update, and the $3 million would be allocated towards those efforts.
Okay, so that sounds more in line with the $3 million is to help us achieve the goals that are already outlined within the Imagine Austin plan, not necessarily to do a revision of the Imagine Austin plan itself. To do a comprehensive update to the plan.
Yes, so what we've identified in the Gantt chart, those are also items that we will put towards a comprehensive plan update. Again, across the board, we will be looking at our current Imagine Austin comprehensive plan and look to do a holistic update to it. Sorry if that is or is not answering your question.
No, it makes sense, but with the prioritization of the items listed on the Gantt chart.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Vela.
To follow up on that, a question. Imagine Austin is, what, 11 years old now, 12 years old, I think. I understand that it is time to update our comprehensive plan. That said, I sure would like to, I see that, the money allocated for that, and my sense would be to knock out the pending, items, your parking, the smallest item from Councilmember Poole, the various others that are out there, before kind of delving into the full rewrite. In other words, we've got so much on our plate right now in terms of what we're doing. Would it make sense to maybe pause a little bit and redirect those resources for the time being to knocking out the items that we've put on your plate? Thoughts about that? Tensions?
What's nice about it is we can create the timeline that we need and that meets council's needs. I did forget to mention that the update will include a future land use map, which a lot of us like to call a FLUM. So that will also be in the conversation. What's nice about, and thank you for committing those funds, is we want to come back to council to say, where are your priorities, have a workshop with you to hear where you see this comprehensive plan update going so that we have your input, again, having extensive community engagement. And so the outline and the timeline is not set in stone yet. So we welcome whatever process you'd like to see us follow.
Councilmember, this is not intended to be kind of, it's intended to be additive. It's intended to fit into a larger framework, and it's not intended to delay us. But I do think we need to understand all the attendant consequences of the individual code amendments in the context of an overall plan. That's all this is intended to do, so you're able to see the whole picture. And I think that's the objective that we want to achieve, so that we understand how these pieces fit together.
Great. And in terms of the sufficient resources to, again, going back to the conversation that we've had since I think the first day that he started, right? You feel good about sufficient resources to be able to execute on all of the like I said, the numerous items that we've been putting on your plate with regard to the timelines that you've laid out on that chart?
Yes, sir.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Just programmatically, I'm interested in the conversation around a citywide FLUM. I'm sure there's probably some ears perking up about what does that mean and, what would public input look like. So I'm curious about what you might see the future of that being. And then I also want to flag for you, in some of our discussions around land development and zoning along the way, I know that the current Imagine Austin has the centers kind of drawn in a very blobby way, for lack of a better policy term, and I'm curious if there's any intent to try to shore up some of the exact boundaries of where some of those centers should be, especially since there's going to be things like ETOD planning that we know is in the works. Can you talk a little bit about public engagement strategies very specifically and how folks should look to that information coming down the pipeline?
I wish I could today. We are in the process of continuing to grow out our staff, and one significant piece is our communication staff. As soon as we bring on that manager, we will kickstart how we will do our community engagement as it relates to comprehensive planning and community engagement as it relates to code amendments and all of the other requirements of our department. So I'm sorry that I'm not able to give you a full plan today, but we do have it queued up for our new staff.
That's all right. I completely understand that where we are in that phase. And so I am a little curious about, since we've had conversations around ETOD planning, in the future,
yes,
how to kind of understand who's in what lane and which groups will be reaching out to which, organizations and neighborhoods to kind of understand that better. So I don't know that there would be an answer today on that, but just kind of a general flagging of process questions.
Okay.
And then we do still have one question that, if I have my screen open right and refreshed, we had one about the ETOD type of work and CIP. So it's number 189. That one is still pending, so we'll wait on an answer for that. But it was about the $500K in the CIP plan for the ETOD planning efforts. So I think that answers my questions on those, but maybe those were just more of helping flag where some of the conversations I've seen land as we move forward through the process.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Any other questions of the planning department? Yeah, Councilmember Vela.
Going back to again the timeline. Excuse me. I know, right? I just wanted to catch you before you left. Would additional resources, in terms of expediting the code amendments, is there anything that we can do, to help you get those back to us quicker?
I love the question. I will be completely honest. Additional funding will always help. Right now, we currently have approximately $500,000 in our FY24 budget for consultant augmentation outside of ETOD planning and all of the other commitments. Right now, we have a solicitation out for zoning case application for the backlog that we currently have, code amendment, as well as density bonus consultant augmentation. Once we embark on those projects, there might be an additional need. I can throw out the number of $500,000. I'm sure that we will find a way to utilize those funds. But until we can bring on those consultants here, what their fees are, we don't have finite numbers for you today. But at the end of this week, we should hear from all of the consultants and have a better idea of how much we'll need. Oh, yes.
Yeah, and I appreciate that response.
Councilmember Veronica Briseno, Assistant City Manager. If I just wanted to add to that, Lauren is also doing a great job of addressing the vacancy needs in the department. As we're doing that, we will readdress, and she has our commitment that we're looking to that workload and what is in front of us in this next fiscal year.
I appreciate it, and I know there's a lot of resources going in and hiring happening and consultants being brought on board. Again, I guess just as we go down the road, if you do decide, as a city manager, that, hey, what we need A, B, C, happy to revisit this at a later date.
All right, anything else on the planning department? Okay, is there another department that somebody wants to bring up? Councilmember Allison Alter.
Thank you. I wanted to bring up EDD. I have a question on the cultural arts funding. Good afternoon. So I noticed in the budget, we fortunately had a very large increase in our HOT funding above what we were anticipating. We made grants last year, I think, that were 2-year grants. So it seems like those might have been premised on a lower estimated amount of HOT coming in. So I wanted to understand how those additional HOT dollars that are going to the cultural arts are going to be spent.
Good afternoon, Sylnovia Holt-Rab, Director of Economic Development Department. As we entered into budget season in FY23, we committed to only spend actuals. So the amount that will be spent in 24 will be adjusted between the 3 programs that we have approved, Thrive, Elevate, and Nexus. And so we will make adjustments to those programs based on actuals.
So does that mean that existing grantees will get additional money, or will you do additional grants?
So the Thrive program will get the same amount that they did this year, and then we will adjust Elevate and Nexus and possibly increase the number that we are able to fund.
Okay, so you'll adjust,
Yes.
you're going to adjust the amounts and potentially add additional recipients?
Potentially.
Okay, and how is that decision going to be made?
Once we evaluate the final numbers, we are still in the first pilot year. Our Nexus grants will go out in September, and then we will reevaluate to come back to start the next cycle at the beginning of FY24.
Okay, so we're using actuals,
Yes.
but the actuals from this past, from fiscal year 23 are much higher. Do you know about how much the difference is?
I can get back with you. I don't have that number right in front of me.
Okay, I think it's several million.
Yeah, it is definitely
so
several
it's
million.
potentially,
Yes.
you know, a large increase in resources that we can use to fund cultural arts.
You are correct.
Okay. Is there any discussion of using any of that to address some of the organizations that didn't get funding in the first round who were legacy organizations?
Again, they will have the opportunity to reapply in Elevate and Nexus at FY24. But the ones that were approved in the first cohort for the 2-year cycle, they will continue into next year.
Thank you. So I have a question for other department one.
Anybody else have anything on cultural arts or
And that's
economic
14
development?
million we estimate to spend next year.
And how much is that above what you had projected originally?
Probably around, I believe, 2 million, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, about 2 million more than we spent this year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have questions on economic development? All right, Councilmember Alter.
Thank you. So I wanted to spend a little time talking about vacancy rates. So in question 83 on vacancy rates, there's a lot of, I just call my colleagues' attention to that answer. I wanted to begin by asking why the management services vacancy level is so high. It's went from a year ago, it was at 30.4%, and now it's at 32.2%. I know there's been some changes of what was in management services, but you know, where are we seeing those vacancies? I think in my conversations with Mr. Venino for the financial stuff, it sounded like they'd made a lot of progress on filling their vacancies. So where are we seeing those vacancies and where are they concentrated? Because they probably are in certain departments or certain groups within management services.
Yeah, so the management services budget described in the budget document is comprised of a number of the smaller offices you'll find in management services. So in particular, Homeland Security and Emergency Management. There were positions added in the budget last year that they're still working to get filled. Civil Rights is another office that has, just off the cuff, I know has quite a few vacancies. And so we could provide additional information if you'd like to see exactly where those vacancies are across the management services group.
Yeah, I would like to see that, and you know, I'm sad to hear that we're still experiencing those vacancies in HESM. We had conversations last year or at some point during this year. You know, I think, you know, we expect HESM to do all this work. We gave them positions in the last budget, and those not being filled yet suggests there's not the priority that I think this council has on emergency planning. So I really want to see us kind of filling those vacancies. There are some other departments that have high vacancies, or at least in the comparison for this chart, their vacancies went up. And so I kind of wanted to just broadly ask, more about the strategies for filling the vacancies citywide. We've had a lot of conversations about 911. I don't know that we yet have closure on the plan for 911, but sort of just broadly, how are we thinking about the strategy? I know it's been a priority of the city manager, but as we go into this final week of the budget deliberations, I know for me that recruitment retention set of issues is really paramount. I want to understand what we're doing.
Councilmember, we need to certainly get you more detail, but here's the brief summary. Yes, there's been a focus on this. For instance, the HESM that was mentioned just a minute ago, we've just there's been some changes in that department. Mr. Snipes has just stepped into that role on a permanent basis, and he knows and recognizes that we have to focus some attention on hiring positions that we've been authorized. Other departments have not been as, that's why we instituted if you hadn't filled it within 24 months, we swept them. I think that was an effort to try to get departments to focus on opening those requisitions to fill those slots. And there's just going to be some continued focused attention. I know there's a couple of ideas that we've got on 911 where we think that we can do some shoring up of the 59 vacancies that are available for call takers, and we've got to figure out when we can go live with that idea, with those concepts that have been shared with us. And what we can do is just stay on. All we will do is keep asking the departments that if you have those vacancies, you need to open the requisitions so that they can be hired. A lot of them, requisitions haven't even been made, and so we're asking departments, if you have the vacancies sitting in your position control number, you should submit the requisitions when you need to fill those slots. We had a discussion with Parks here earlier today. We know that we can move positions out of certain areas of Parks into areas that are more important. Departments can do that, and so part of it is for us to kind of focus on where we put the human resources to work at the highest priority. But we owe you a more complete answer than that. We realize that.
Thank you. And you obviously evaluate your, directors. How is fixing their vacancy rate part of their evaluation?
Well, I mean, we've made personnel changes, as I said, so that's one part of the evaluation. We've asked them to take a look at it. We'll certainly work with assistant managers as those individuals that report to them to make sure this is focused attention. This is but one element of a whole host of things we've got to do in terms of evaluating people. But I will say just for a moment that we have a very decentralized HR function. It's very different than what it was when I was here 21 years ago. And so we've delegated a lot of that HR function inside those departments. And I must say that those departments sometimes have not been as diligent as they should have been in opening the requisitions, doing the recruitment and hiring. Some have tried to lay this off on the civil service, and certainly civil service may slow us down a little bit, but that's not the reason for this. It's one that we just haven't paid enough attention to it. Another is that and I don't try to do this to be flip, but having a lot of people working from home has been a problem, and because some of those departments 4 or 5 days a week they're working from home. It's hard to get that team spirit and camaraderie that needs to go to get this done. So part of this is we need to change that culture so that people have that sense of urgency that the council has, and that's something we'll commit to you.
Yes, Councilmember Fuentes.
Thank you. I just wanted to add my comments on this topic in particular. It sounds like 911 staffing is an issue of great importance to all of us, and we know at least 2 of our colleagues or 3 of our colleagues have amendments around 911 call center. Councilmember Allison Alter, Councilmember Kelly, I think Councilmember Bella may also have an amendment on the 911 call center. So, Manager, I wanted to flag on Thursday when we go through our amendments, that might be a good time for staff to highlight or surface the ideas that you have on strategies to staff up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're happy to do that.
Good idea.
I just want to clarify, I don't have an amendment this year. I have had them multiple times, and I'm hoping that this time around will be the charm for 911.
Mayor, one other thing, I know this has to do with positions, and sometimes that's kind of I guess the impetus is to add positions to do some work. And I must say that sometimes that is not the most effective way, especially if we have a system that we can't have the throughput to be able to get that done. And that's why you do staff augmentation, the things that Richard talked about here a minute ago. You can use consultants to get some of this work done so that you don't have to have a full-time employee to get it done. But we've got to bring back the entire discussion on that item, and we can do that on Thursday.
Do you have any more? Okay. Since it looks like we're about to wind up, I want to recognize the city manager.
Mayor and Council, many of you have expressed concerns, echoing what others in the community have shared regarding the creation of the Community and Business Equity Department, plus other aspects of our reorganizations. Fundamentally, there have been issues that have been raised that touch the history of how the Equity Office in particular was established, and it's critically important that you be able to focus your attention on the resource allocations for all these departments as you adopt the budget for '24. And as a result, I want to take a step back. We're going to reassess the concerns that have been expressed about the creation of these organizational changes. And once the budget's approved, there are some senior leadership positions that I'm considering establishing, as well as restructuring, that will further improve our visibility and alignment for this organization. And I look forward to sharing with you that analysis at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Councilmember Fuentes.
Thank you, Manager. I appreciate your comments on holding off on any organizational changes on the Equity Office, Civil Rights Office, Sustainability and Resiliency Office. I know through a series of conversations that I've had with you alongside Councilmembers Vela, Velasquez, Kadri, and Ryan Alter, we've all shared concerns that we've heard from our community. And so giving us the time and space to have these more public conversations with our community from a process that's not coupled with the budget is appreciated. So I appreciate your leadership on that.
Thank you, Manager. Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Vela.
First, again, I just want to thank the city manager. Appreciate his comments. And I have a question about sales taxes, I believe, for our CFO.
Mr. Van Eno, you have a question about sales taxes. Councilmember Vela.
Capital Metro released its budget estimate recently. They are looking at a 4.5% sales tax growth. They're budgeting for a 4.5% sales tax growth. The city is budgeting for, I believe, 3.5% sales tax growth. I just wanted to ask you, how are you feeling about that? What do you think about the differences? Just kind of get your thoughts and impressions.
Sure. And I have not compared notes yet with the Cap Metro CFO. That CFO is fairly new, but in the past we have compared notes. We're usually within 1% plus or minus. We're very close. Their service territory, their sales tax area is not exactly the same as ours, so that's going to be part of the reason for when we look at numbers having the variance. Also, what I don't know is if they're looking at things on more of an annual basis. If you just looked at a full 12 months of data, you could certainly maybe see a trend that would warrant higher than the 3.5% we're projecting. But if you look at the last 4 months, if you look at the very recent history, we're around 3 or 4% is what we've been trending the last 3 or 4 months. We will get another sales tax data point, I believe, next week. And we're getting it tomorrow, I was told. Yeah. So we'll have that additional data point. I will reach out and see what they were thinking. Another thing is, with sales tax, the way we project it is it's growth off of the current year. So in the current year, I believe we're projecting 3.5% or 6.5% for fiscal year 23, and that is a projection because we haven't concluded 23 yet. There's a 2-month lag on sales tax collections, but we're assuming a 3.5% growth next year on top of a 6.5% growth this year. What I don't know is, Cap Metro might be assuming 5.5% in the current year and then 4.5% growth next year, and it maybe kind of comes out to the same. So a lot of it is, depends upon what you're projecting this year versus next year, that service territory, and how long of a time frame are you looking at to base your projections on. But we'll compare notes with them.
I appreciate it, and I know that I'm trying to keep one eye on the economic indicators, which have been strong. We had good inflation news, which I know can be kind of not, kind of a contraindicator for sales tax growth. Obviously, if there's a lot of inflation, then, your sales tax will grow with that. But, just in general, I think we've had strong economic growth. The economy looks decent. Inflation is, starting to abate a little bit. And, again, I hope we continue in this kind of Goldilocks, economy. I guess you're comfortable with the 3.5%. That's not, regardless of what you're seeing outside in the macroeconomic world, y'all are sticking with the 3.5%.
That's our recommendation. That's our most volatile revenue source. When it decides that it's time for a recession and it levels out, it's generally not going to be a nice, slow, linear growth path, right? It goes up very fast and it comes down very fast. So if we do hit a recession, we're likely to see a 5 to 10% decline, and we'll have to deal with that. So we always advise council to be conservative on that number. Of course, we have that budget stabilization reserve fund, getting back to the reserve level conversations that helps stabilize us during those economic fluctuations. But certainly the more aggressive we are on sales tax, the more risk we put ourselves at, of not hitting that number. We would always like to be a little bit above our estimates than the alternative, right? It's not a problem for us to come in $1 million or $2 million above our estimates. If we come in $1 million or $2 million below them, well, we got to figure that out.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I mean, better to be conservative with your revenue projections than excessively optimistic and then be in a world of hurt, down the road. Great. I just wanted to touch base about that. It would be great. I mean, from a revenue perspective, if we could boost that up. Let's see what I guess tomorrow brings and see what the numbers are. We're all hoping for a good, solid number.
Thank you, Councilmember. Members, I think.
Oh, sorry, Mayor.
You still got something? Go.
ARR, Austin Resource Recovery. A quick question for them. Shouldn't take but a couple minutes.
Richard, I'm going to turn it over to you. Members, I'm going to need to excuse myself, so I'm going to turn over the meeting to the Mayor Pro Tem. I just want to remind everybody, we meet again in 2 days on the 10th. That will be our amendment day, an IFC day, as we've talked about, where the council members will lay out their amendments and proposed IFCs, and we'll be able to have a discussion. And if we need staff, we'll obviously have them available as well. And then, of course, the 16th is posted as the day that we will have the first opportunity to vote on the budget. There will also be the opportunity for public comment on that day, and if needed, we will use the 17th and the 18th. And with that, Mayor Pro Tem, I apologize, but I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
I wanted to drill down just a little bit more on the transfer center. Actually, I have an amendment. We just drafted it just in case, but there was some planning that I think is scheduled to be done, some studies on the ARR Transfer Center. Do you have any details on how much the department is anticipating to spend on the study? Any idea of a timeline, anything like that?
Sure. Good afternoon. Richard McHale, Interim Director for Austin Resource Recovery. We had a presentation earlier last week about the Northeast Service Center. I had mentioned that project had some remaining funds left over from the feasibility study that was done on that property. So we intend to use those funds to do similar studies for a transfer station. Mm-hmm. The feasibility study for the Northeast the Northeast Service Center was about $120,000 for that study. We were able to take some of that money to do some feasibility study on our FM 812 property for some projects that we're looking at doing out there. That feasibility study is going to be about $80,000, so we're projecting about $100,000 for a feasibility study for the property. Now, this all depends also as far as what property we're looking at. So we're looking at city properties right now. If we are able to identify a city property, the project can move along a little bit quicker. The Northeast Service Center will be one of the first projects to go through the Public Facility Corporation. So, and I think it was mentioned at the last meeting that from RFP to move in was about 48 months. So we're hopeful. My goal is to have a transfer station operating prior to our landfill contract expiring, which will be about May of 2029. So about about 5 years from now, that contract will expire. So we would hope to have something in place by then, but it really depends on the property that's picked. If we're able to identify that property quickly, the feasibility study itself will probably take about 6 months. So I think the money we have right now should get us through the early planning stages and the feasibility study. So I think possibly in FY25, we may be coming back and looking for some additional monies to actually move that project through.
Excellent. I just wanted to, just to get that on the record and in a public comment. And again, just to reiterate, I think it's a great project. I really appreciate that y'all are planning and moving forward on it. And look forward to reading the study when it's done and ready to go.
Good. I appreciate that. I appreciate the support as well. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And I've got one question as well. Does anyone else have questions for resource recovery first? I'll just jump right in. We have a question and answer that's not yet responded to yet, and it is specifically about the litter abatement and creek study that y'all did. It suggested that there should be a full-time trash coordinator or what I want to call the trash guru of just keeping track of all the projects. Can you tell me if that position is baked into this budget already, or if we need to allocate some dollars toward that position?
So that project was actually done by Watershed Protection Department, not
Okay.
ARR. So ARR, and I don't believe Watershed have any funding in there for that position. But our ARR does have staff that basically do that. Our litter abatement division manager basically has that role. So we kind of see that as a task that we already have in-house. So we wouldn't want to add any additional funding for another personnel when I think we have existing staff that can do that work. We've actually done a lot of that work, but I think there's some gaps as far as the community groups that we've reached out to. We haven't encompassed everyone that is involved in that. In fact, today I just saw an article about UT doing a project along West Campus there where they're going to be doing some litter stuff, and that was the first we had heard about that. So that's an example of how we need to have a better awareness of everything that's going on in the community. But I think we can do that work existing in-house.
Okay. Sounds good. Does anyone else have further questions for staff? Allison Alter.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. McHale. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you for launching the hazardous waste pilot in District 10 and District 4. My constituents have really loved that, and I was glad in our conversations to confirm that that would be continuing. What would it take to expand that to another northern district?
So we will be maintaining that pilot even though we haven't added any additional funds to expand it citywide. We think we're going to be able to expand it some other districts in North Austin. Those are areas that are typically, we see less participation at our facility at the southeast, in our Todd Lane household hazardous waste facility. So I think we can expand that ever so slowly in those areas. We don't want to get too much ahead because we're not sure of the demand. We actually expected a lot more folks to come down from the northern areas, but in talking with the community members, we find a lot of them actually like going to the facility because they're able to pick up materials from our reuse store and bring things that our current curbside collection system doesn't collect, such as electronics and stuff. So as we move forward, I think we'd rather phase this in instead of going full citywide. And I think we're able to do that in this upcoming budget year with the existing resources we have because we've seen not as large of an increase as we had expected.
Yeah, I think what we're hearing from folks is they have a lot of stuff at the beginning, and then they're maybe not, kind of stored it up for a while and it needs to get out. But I'm glad to hear that it will be able to phase in more. I didn't expect it would go citywide. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure that we were moving in the right direction of making it available because I know my constituents are really happy with having that opportunity. So,
yeah, I think at some point we would want to be citywide just because there are a lot of folks that aren't able to make it to the facility. Either they don't have a vehicle or there's some other means of obstacles for them to get there. So our goal is from an equity standpoint, is to make it available to all the citizens.
Thank you. I just meant that with the phasing, since it seems to come in waves, so you would have to phase it or it wouldn't work anyway. But thank you.
Thank you. And then I saw Director Morales had come down. I don't want to skip over you if you made the effort to come on down. Do you feel that the needs for that litter abatement study for the creeks is sufficiently met with this year's budget? Do you need any extra position to assist?
Well, good afternoon. Jorge Morales, Director of Watershed. I would say ditto to what Richard just said, and we did have prepared the answer. You should be getting it shortly, but we don't think we need it for FY24. We need more coordination before we can come back with what that might be looking like.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there any additional questions for staff we need to cover? Councilmember Allison Alter?
So I don't have a question for staff, but I know there were several answers that came up today that related to some colleagues' amendments. So I'm just wondering if you feel like you have amendments that are no longer pertinent, if you could let us know so that we can keep that in mind. I was glad to hear several of the concerns were addressed, but it just would be helpful for those of us who are not singled in on those amendments to understand whether folks who are proposing those feel like those need to continue to be part of the discussion.
I wholeheartedly agree. I had a few that I had put in as placeholders, hoping that when the questions and answers were coming in that they would not be necessary because they were addressed in one way or another. Does staff know when the rest of the unanswered questions may come in? Should we expect those before Thursday so we could make amendments if we need to with some of those numbers?
Yes, we're really pushing to get them done by tomorrow. And so I think we're down to under 40. I believe that's in, they may tell me something differently in a minute, but I think we're under 40 questions that we're still trying to respond to. We're trying to get them pushed out by tomorrow.
Okay. And then tomorrow we'll be getting the sales tax final assessments as well.
Yes, we'll receive those numbers. We'll receive that report tomorrow, and then Eric, who does all the revenue calculations, will begin working on distributing that information after he finishes his analysis. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Last call for questions for today. I don't see any hands up, so I will just, as a friendly reminder to my colleagues, make sure you've gone through, and if there's any last amendments that need to be made, or any other proposals that people want to bring forward, it's best to daylight them as soon as humanly possible. I think at this point, as we develop our spreadsheet and finalize the last few dollars and locations that some of the funding might be coming from for these amendments, we'll want to know exactly what dollars we're looking at. And we'll also want to make sure that we've pulled down anything that's unnecessary at this point or are aware of any amendments that might potentially be coming. I know I had one last year. We had to switch at the last minute. But by then, we had so many days of discussion about whittling through those last few dollars that it just didn't make sense to try to put in an additional ask at the last minute. So just make sure you've got everything daylighted on the message board. And I think that covers us for today. I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 1:48 p.m. And thank you, everybody, for all of the discussion today.